Tyrannosaurus rex. The name conjures an immediate image. Massive jaws, 6-ton frame, bone-crushing bite force exceeding 12,000 pounds per square inch. The apex predator of the late Cretaceous. Welcome to Paleo Nocturne. Every creature you'll see tonight has been reconstructed from the latest paleontological research. Not how we imagine them, how the fossil evidence suggests they actually appeared. Thank you for being here. But T-Rex didn't emerge fully formed. It represents the culmination of an evolutionary journey that began not with dominance, but with obscurity. I'm curious, where in the world are you right now? Settling into bed? On a quiet drive? Wherever you are, I hope you're comfortable as we explore this story together. This is the story of Tyrannosauridae. Not a single species, but an entire family. 35 known species across 100 million years. If you enjoy these scientifically grounded explorations through deep time, a subscribe helps the channel grow. And to those already subscribed, thank you. Your support makes this possible. From Jurassic forests, where the first tyrannosauroids hunted in the shadow of allosaurs, to the final days of the Cretaceous, when the largest terrestrial predator in Earth's history ruled the plains of Laramidia. We'll move through this story slowly, deliberately. 9 chapters, 4 hours, 35 species, each one reconstructed from contemporary fossil evidence. Each one as accurate as current science allows. Some weighed less than a wolf, others matched the mass of a modern elephant. Some were covered in proto-feathers, others bore scales and scutes, but all of them shared a common lineage, a single adaptive radiation that demonstrates evolution's patience. The tyrannosaurs didn't conquer through sudden innovation. They succeeded by persisting, by adapting, by waiting for ecological opportunities that took millions of years to arrive. So let the day's tensions fade, because the story ahead begins not with a roar, but with something small, feathered and nearly forgotten, hunting quietly in the understory of a Jurassic forest 165 million years ago. Chapter 1. Humble Origins. 165 million years ago, the world was still assembling itself. Pangaea, the great supercontinent, had begun to fragment, but the process was slow. Continents drifted at the pace of growing fingernails. Oceans widened by centimeters each year. The climate was warm, mild. Even at latitudes that would one day know ice, forests grew thick and rivers ran year-round. This was the Middle Jurassic, an age of transition. The great sauropods, the long-necked titans, had claimed the role of dominant herbivores. Diplodocus, Brachiosaurus, Mamenchisaurus. Animals weighing dozens of tons, browsing on vegetation 30 meters above the ground. And where herbivores thrived, predators followed. The apex predators of the Jurassic were allosaurs, powerful, heavily built theropods reaching 9 meters in length. Allosaurus in North America, Yangchuanosaurus in Asia. These were the lions of their time, the kings. But in the understory, beneath the canopy, below the notice of giants, smaller hunters were refining a different strategy. Patience, precision, sensory acuity over raw power. These were the first tyrannosauroids, not apex predators, not dominant, not the largest or most fearsome animals in their ecosystems, but successful, adaptable, persistent. And across the next 100 million years, that persistence would matter more than early dominance ever could. In the forests of Middle Jurassic England, one of these early hunters was moving through dense vegetation. 2 meters long from nose to tail, perhaps 15 kilograms in mass. About the size of a large dog, though built nothing like one. bipedal, balanced on powerful hind limbs with a long tail serving as counterweight. The forelimbs were small but functional, 3 fingers on each hand, each tipped with a curved claw. The skull was narrow, delicate compared to later forms. A small bony crest rose along the snout, low, subtle, probably serving some display function we can only guess at. The teeth were small but effective, blade-like, serrated along both edges, designed for slicing through flesh, not crushing bone. This was Proceratosaurus. It moved carefully through the understory. The forest floor was a maze of ferns, cycads, and fallen logs. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in scattered shafts, creating a patchwork of light and shadow. The air was thick, humid. The sound of insects was constant, a background drone punctuated by the calls of distant creatures, early pterosaurs, primitive birds, things that had no names because names wouldn't exist for another 165 million years. Proceratosaurus paused, head cocked slightly, listening. Somewhere ahead, something was moving, small, probably a mammal. These were abundant in the Jurassic, though none larger than a modern rat. Or perhaps a young dinosaur, a juvenile of some herbivorous species, separated from its herd. The Tyrannosaur shifted its weight, lowered its body profile. The hunting crouch was instinctive, encoded in muscle memory, shaped by millions of years of predation stretching back to the first theropods. Step, pause, listen. Step. The movement ahead continued, unaware. 3 meters now. 2. Then, explosive acceleration. The Proceratosaurus covered the distance in 3 bounds. Jaws opened, closed. The serrated teeth found their mark. Brief struggle, then stillness. The Tyrannosaur lifted its head, prey secured, and moved deeper into cover, away from open areas where larger predators might notice, away from competition. This was the pattern of early Tyrannosauroid life. Hunt small prey, avoid larger predators, survive through stealth and efficiency rather than confrontation. It worked. For millions of years, it worked. Thousands of kilometers to the east, in what would one day become central Siberia, the landscape was different. Rivers here were wide and slow. Fed by distant highlands, they meandered across floodplains, creating a maze of channels, oxbow lakes, and seasonal wetlands. The vegetation was similar to England's: conifers, ginkgos, cycads, tree ferns. But the ecosystem was more open, less dense. The forest gave way to grasslands in places, though grass as we know it didn't exist yet. Ground cover of primitive plants served the same role. And along these rivers, another early tyrannosaur had found a niche, slightly larger than Proceratosaurus, 2.5 meters long, perhaps 25 kilograms. The skull was longer, narrower. The snout extended forward like a probe, and the teeth, numerous, closely spaced, slightly recurved, told a story of specialization. This was Chilescus. It stood in shallow water, motionless, a picture of patience. Water moved around its legs, shin-deep, cool, carrying sediment from upstream. The riverbed was visible through the clear shallows, mud, pebbles, and fish. The rivers of Middle Jurassic Siberia were rich with fish, early forms ancestral to species that would persist into the modern era. They moved in schools, fed on insects and smaller fish, and they were abundant. Chilescus waited. Hunting fish requires different skills than hunting terrestrial prey. Speed matters less, precision matters more. The tyrannosaur's head was angled down, eyes focused on the water. The narrow snout reduced water resistance. The closely spaced teeth were designed to grip slippery prey, not to slice flesh. A shadow passed beneath the surface, then another. The Kilescus remained absolutely still. More shadows. A school. Perhaps 20 fish, each 15 to 20 centimeters long. The Tyrannosaur's head snapped down. A sudden, precise strike. Water erupted. Spray caught the light. When the surface settled, the Kilescus was stepping backward toward shore. A fish was gripped in its jaws, held firmly by numerous small teeth that prevented escape. It reached the bank, shook the fish once, swallowed it whole, then returned to the shallows. This was the pattern. Not one large meal, but many small ones. Fish couldn't sustain a large predator long term. They didn't provide enough calories per catch. But for a 25-kilogram tyrannosaur, they were sufficient. And fishing provided an advantage, reduced competition. The large predators, the allosaurs and other dominant theropods, hunted on land. They took large prey, dinosaurs, young sauropods when opportunity arose. They didn't wade into rivers to catch fish. This created a niche, an ecological space that Kilescus could occupy without direct conflict with larger, more powerful predators. It was a survival strategy that worked across millions of years, not through dominance, but through avoidance. The Jurassic world was vast. Room existed for multiple strategies. Time passed. Continents continued their slow drift. Sea levels rose and fell. Climate shifted in cycles measured in millions of years. And the tyrannosauroids persisted. By the late Jurassic, 160 million years. Ergo, some were experimenting with new adaptations. In what would become northeastern China, one lineage had developed something unusual, an elaborate cranial crest. Not the small, subtle ridge that Proceratosaurus bore. This was dramatic. A hollow structure of bone rising from the skull, extending backward over the head. Tall, delicate, clearly visible. This was Guanlong, 3 meters long, perhaps 70 kilograms, larger than Proceratosaurus, more robust in build, but still far from apex predator size. The crest was the defining feature. Thin-walled, hollow, light enough that it didn't significantly burden the animal, and almost certainly used for display. Color is lost to time. Fossilization preserves bone, occasionally preserves soft tissue imprints, but rarely preserves pigmentation. We can't know what colors adorned that crest, but we can infer purpose. Modern animals use visual displays for communication, recognition, mate attraction, territorial signaling. Guanlong likely did the same. The crest caught light as the animal moved through forest clearings, turned heads, signaled identity from a distance. Here I am. This is my species. This is my status within it. Multiple Guanlong specimens have been found in close proximity. Not definitive proof of social behavior. Animals can be buried together by floods or other catastrophes without having lived together. But suggestive. Perhaps they tolerated each other's presence. Perhaps juveniles remained with parents longer than in solitary species. Perhaps they formed loose social groups. We don't know with certainty, but the evidence leans toward at least some degree of social tolerance. This would make sense for mid-sized predators. Guanlong lived in ecosystems where it wasn't the apex predator. Larger theropods, allosaurs, occupied that role. Competition was intense. Social behavior provides advantages in competitive environments. Cooperative defense of kills. Shared vigilance against larger predators. Collective mobbing to drive competitors away. Whether Guanlong employed these strategies is speculation, but the possibility exists. What's certain is that the crest served some function important enough that natural selection maintained it across generations. Display, recognition, communication, tools for navigating a complex social and ecological landscape. The late Jurassic was a time of giants. In North America, the Morrison Formation preserves one of the most famous dinosaur ecosystems ever discovered. Allosaurus, Ceratosaurus, Torvosaurus, predators reaching 8 to 10 meters in length, and herbivores to match. Diplodocus, Camarasaurus, Brachiosaurus, Stegosaurus, massive animals, dominant, shaping ecosystems through their sheer biomass. And among them, nearly invisible, a small tyrannosaur was surviving. 2 meters long, 30 kilograms, about the size of a large dog, though with very different proportions. This was Stokesaurus. It hunted at dawn and dusk, times when the large predators were less active, when light was dim and smaller prey emerged from cover. It occupied terrain the giants avoided: rocky outcrops, dense thickets, areas where a 2-meter predator could move efficiently, but a 9-meter allosaur could not. It ate what the giants ignored: small ornithopods, early mammals, lizards, eggs when it could find them, insects if necessary. This wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the dramatic life of an apex predator bringing down multi-ton prey. But it was effective. Survival doesn't require dominance. It requires finding a way to acquire enough calories, avoid being killed, and reproduce. Stokesaurus did all three. The Morrison Formation preserves its bones alongside those of giants. Not abundant. Small predators fossilize rarely because their bones are more easily destroyed, but present. Proof that while allosaurs dominated, smaller hunters persisted in the margins. This pattern, apex predators, claiming the spotlight while smaller species quietly succeed, would repeat throughout the Mesozoic. And the tyrannosauroids, for most of their history, were the quiet ones. The ones surviving, adapting, waiting, not yet their time. At the end of the Jurassic, one more early tyrannosaur left its mark in stone. This one from coastal England. The Kimmeridge Clay Formation, a marine deposit preserving creatures that lived along shorelines and in shallow seas. Duratyrant, 2.5 meters long, perhaps 50 kilograms, similar in size to Calescus, but adapted to a different environment. Where Calescus hunted in freshwater rivers, Duratyrant occupied coastal zones, tidal pools, estuaries, river mouths where fresh water met salt. These are rich environments, high productivity, abundant food, but different prey than inland forests or rivers. The teeth of Duratyrant reflect this. The premaxillary teeth, those at the front of the upper jaw, were robust, stouter than in Proceratosaurus or Guanlong, built for gripping struggling fish, for holding prey caught in tidal pools. The coastal environment provided fish trapped by receding tides, marine reptiles when opportunity arose, early birds, crustaceans, carrion washed ashore. A tyrannosaur weighing 50 kilograms could sustain itself here, could establish territories, could reproduce. And for millions of years, lineages like Duratyrants occupied these coastal niches. Specialist, adapted, successful within their specific context. The Jurassic was ending. Climate was shifting again. The supercontinent was fragmenting further. Sea levels were changing. And the dominant predators, the allosaurs that had ruled for tens of millions of years, were beginning their decline. Not sudden, not catastrophic, just gradual reduction in diversity, slow contraction of range, the kind of change that unfolds over millions of years and becomes visible only in the fossil record. Why they declined is debated. Climate change, competition, the rise of new herbivore groups requiring different hunting strategies. Probably all of these. Probably more factors we don't yet understand. But as the allosaurs faded, space opened. Ecological niches that had been occupied were slowly vacated. And the tyrannosauroids, small, marginal, persistent, were still there. Still hunting, still adapting, still reproducing. Not yet large, not yet dominant, not yet the apex predators they would become, but present, functional, waiting. 5 species we've met in this chapter. Proceratosaurus in the forests of England, Kilescus along Siberian rivers, Guanlong with its elaborate crest in Chinese woodlands, Stokesaurus surviving in the shadow of Morrison giants, Duratyrant working the coastal margins. 5 expressions of early tyrannosaur life. 5 strategies for survival in a world dominated by others. None were apex predators. None shaped their ecosystems through dominance. But all succeeded in the most fundamental measure. They survived long enough to reproduce, to pass genetic information forward, to continue the lineage. And across millions of years, through the end of the Jurassic and into the Cretaceous, that lineage would change, slowly, incrementally, generation by generation. Larger body sizes would evolve, enhanced senses would develop, new hunting strategies would emerge. But those changes lay ahead. For now, in the closing years of the Jurassic, the tyrannosauroids remained what they had been for 60 million years. Small, patient, persistent. The humble origins of a dynasty that would not fully rise for another 50 million years. The age of giants was coming, but it would not arrive suddenly. It would not emerge from nowhere. It would grow from these small hunters, these marginal survivors, these creatures content to live in the shadows while others claimed the sun. Evolution is patient. Chapter 2. Age of Feathers, Early Cretaceous, 130 million years ago. The world was changing. Flowering plants, angiosperms, were beginning their rise. Still rare, confined to disturbed habitats and riverbanks, but present. A revolution in the making. The climate was cooling from the extreme greenhouse of the late Jurassic. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but measurably. Average global temperatures dropping several degrees over millions of years. Continental configurations were shifting. The supercontinent Pangaea, already fragmented, continued its separation. Laurasia in the north, Gondwana in the south, seaways expanding between them. And in the forests of what would become Asia, the tyrannosauroids were evolving something new. Feathers, not for flight. These animals were earthbound, bipedal, built for running and hunting on solid ground, but for insulation, for thermoregulation in cooling climates, for display, perhaps even for camouflage. This is the age when tyrannosaurs stopped being generic small theropods and began developing the characteristics that would define their family. Enlarged brains relative to body size, enhanced hearing through specialized inner ear structures, sophisticated sensory processing that would eventually make them among the most perceptive predators of their time. They were still small, still marginal, still competing with larger, more established predators, carcharodontosaurs in some regions, spinosaurs in others. But they were changing, and in evolutionary terms, change is survival. The Jurassic tyrannosauroids had established the basic template: bipedal carnivores, relatively small, occupying mesopredator niches. The early Cretaceous species would refine that template, experiment with it, push boundaries. Some would grow larger, Others would develop specialized features. All would retain, or in some cases expand, their feather coverage. Because in the cooling world of the early Cretaceous, feathers were an advantage, and natural selection rewards advantages. That challenge. Feathers. We don't know when feathers first appeared in the Tyrannosauroid lineage. The Jurassic fossil record doesn't preserve them, or hasn't yet. Perhaps they were always there, inherited from even earlier theropod ancestors. Perhaps they evolved specifically in response to early Cretaceous cooling. What we know is that by 126 million years ago, they were present. And we know because the Yixian Formation preserves them. This was a landscape of lakes and volcanoes in what is now Liaoning Province, China. Volcanic eruptions were frequent. Ash fell regularly, burying organisms rapidly in fine-grained sediment that preserved extraordinary detail. Feather impressions, skin texture, stomach contents, soft tissues that normally decay within days were frozen in stone. And among the fossils preserved in this formation was a small tyrannosaur, unlike anything found in the Jurassic. 1.5 meters long, 5 kilograms in mass, about the size of a large house cat. This was Dilong. The fossilized remains show something remarkable: filamentous structures extending from the body. Simple, not the complex pennaceous feathers of modern birds, but definitely feathers. Proto-feathers, technically. Early-stage structures, elongated, hair-like, branching in some cases, covering at least portions of the body, possibly all of it. Why feathers at this size? At 5 kilograms, with high surface area relative to volume, heat loss is a significant challenge. Small animals lose warmth faster than large ones. It's basic physics. The smaller you are, the more surface area you have relative to your mass, and the faster heat radiates away. In a cooling early Cretaceous climate, that loss mattered. Feathers provided the solution. They trap air close to the skin, create insulation, the same principle that makes down jackets effective. For a 5-kilogram predator hunting in temperate forests where winter temperatures dropped to near freezing, that insulation was valuable. Dilong wasn't alone in having feathers. Other theropods in the Yixian Formation show them too. Dromaeosaurs, early birds, even some ornithischians, a completely different dinosaur lineage, independently evolved similar structures. But Dilong was the first tyrannosaur we could prove had them. And if Dilong had feathers, the implication is clear. Other early tyrannosauroids probably did too. We simply haven't found the right fossils to confirm it. The Yixian Formation preserves a moment in time, a snapshot of early Cretaceous ecosystems. Lakes surrounded by conifer forests, volcanic highlands in the distance, rivers draining through valleys, and a diversity of life that, thanks to the volcanic ash, we can study in unusual detail. Dilong hunted in these forests. Its prey was small. Mammals. These were abundant by the early Cretaceous, though still modest in size. Lizards. Juvenile dinosaurs. Psittacosaurus was common, a small ceratopsian, parrot-beaked, about the size of a medium dog. For a 5-kilogram predator, a juvenile Psittacosaurus represented a substantial meal. The hunting strategy was probably similar to Proceratosaurus. Stealth, patience, explosive strikes over short distances. The feathers may have helped here too, not just for warmth, but for silent movement. They dampen sound, reduce the rustle of vegetation that bare scales might produce. Every advantage mattered when you weighed 5 kilograms and shared the forest with larger predators. But Dilong, despite its small size, was part of something larger. The Tyrannosauroid lineage was changing, experimenting, testing new body sizes, new adaptations, new ecological strategies. And just 1 million years later, practically simultaneous in geological terms, another species appeared that demonstrated just how far the experimentation was going. Same formation, same general region, same temperate forests and volcanic landscapes. But this tyrannosaur was enormous, 9 meters long, 1,400 kilograms. This was Yutyrannus, and it too had feathers. Not sparse coverage, not just juveniles, adults, fully grown animals over 1 ton in mass, covered in long filamentous feathers. Some of these feathers exceeded 15 centimeters in length. 3 specimens have been found, different sizes, different individuals, all preserve feather impressions. The evidence is not ambiguous. This is the largest feathered animal ever discovered, not the largest feathered dinosaur, not the largest feathered creature from the Mesozoic, the largest feathered animal in Earth's entire history. Nothing alive today comes close. The largest modern birds, ostriches, emus, reach perhaps 150 kilograms. Yutyrannus was 10 times that mass. At this size, the physics of heat retention change. Large animals lose heat slowly. Their volume to surface area ratio favors retention. An elephant doesn't need insulation the way a mouse does. So why did Yutyrannus have such extensive feather coverage? The answer lies in climate. The Yixian Formation represents a period when northeastern China was cooler than it would be during the later Cretaceous. Average temperatures were perhaps 10 degrees Celsius, lower than in the age of T-Rex. Winters were genuinely cold, not Arctic, not below freezing for extended periods, but cold enough that even a 1.5 ton animal would benefit from insulation, especially an active predator. If you're hunting, moving, exerting energy in cold conditions, heat loss accelerates. Muscles generate warmth through activity, but that warmth radiates away if you're not insulated. The feathers solved this. Yutyrannus could hunt in winter, could remain active when temperatures dropped, could maintain body temperature without burning excessive calories just to stay warm. This provided competitive advantage. Prey doesn't stop needing to eat in winter. Herbivores still forage, and a predator that can remain active in cold conditions has access to prey that less adapted predators might struggle to pursue. The feathers also likely served display functions. At 15 centimeters long, covering much of a 9-meter body, they would have been visually striking. We don't know the colors. Pigmentation analysis hasn't been possible on these specimens, but it's reasonable to assume patterns. Stripes, patches, countershading, anything that aided in communication or camouflage. Modern large predators use visual signals. Lions have manes, tigers have stripes. Yutyrannus, with its coat of long feathers, almost certainly did the same. The skull structure shows Yutyrannus was a powerful predator. Deep jaws, robust teeth. Bite force estimates place it well above earlier tyrannosauroids. The prey base supported this. The Yixian Formation had large herbivores, early ceratopsians reaching several hundred kilograms, ornithopods of similar size. Yutyrannus could take these animals. Not with the overwhelming force of later tyrannosaurids. The bite wasn't quite there yet, but effectively enough. Ambush predation, probably. Using terrain and vegetation for cover. Explosive attacks from close range. Targeting vulnerable areas. Neck, flanks, hind limbs. The same basic strategy that would characterize larger tyrannosaurids, just at a smaller scale. But Yutyrannus represented something important, proof that the Tyrannosauroid lineage could scale up. For 80 million years, they had been small to mid-sized mesopredators, occupying niches below the apex. Yutyrannus demonstrated they could reach apex predator sizes while maintaining the characteristic tyrannosauroid body plan. Enhanced senses, inherited from earlier ancestors. Powerful jaws, newly refined. Bipedal build optimized for terrestrial hunting. And now, at 400 kilograms, competing with established apex predators. Not dominant yet. Not the largest predators in all ecosystems, but viable at that scale. The blueprint was forming. Not far from where Yutyrannus hunted, another large early Cretaceous tyrannosaur was establishing itself, perhaps even larger. Estimates place it at 9 to 10 meters, 2,500 kilograms. This was Sinosauropteryx. The fossil material is incomplete. The holotype consists of skull fragments, vertebrae, partial limbs. Enough for confident identification and size estimation. Not enough for complete reconstruction. But what's preserved is informative. The skull was robust, over a meter in length, deep jaws with powerful muscle attachment sites, teeth that were longer and stouter than in Yutyrannus. This was a power predator, built for delivering devastating bites. Whether it had feathers, we don't know. The preservation didn't capture them. But given that Yutyrannus, of similar size from similar environments, was extensively feathered, it seems likely. Sinosauropteryx lived slightly later than Yutyrannus. The Jiufatang Formation, where it was found, represents a somewhat warmer period. Perhaps the feathers were less extensive, perhaps concentrated on the back and tail for display rather than full body insulation. Or perhaps they were simply not preserved in this particular specimen. Either way, what Sinosauropteryx demonstrates is that the trend toward large size wasn't isolated to one species. Multiple tyrannosauroid lineages were experimenting with increased body mass during the early Cretaceous. Different species, different sizes, different specific adaptations, but all testing whether larger builds could be viable. And clearly, they could. The prey base existed. The ecological niches were available. The tyrannosauroid body plans scaled effectively. By 120 million years ago, tyrannosaurs weighing over a ton were established in Asian ecosystems. Not yet the largest predators everywhere. Not yet globally dominant, but no longer marginal. No longer small mesopredators living in the shadows. They had arrived at the table. They were contenders. While Asia saw the emergence of giants, other regions hosted their own tyrannosaur evolution. In early Cretaceous England, another species was occupying coastal and floodplain environments, 4 to 5 meters long, 200 kilograms. This was Eotyrannus, mid-sized, not as large as Yutyrannus or Sinosauropteryx, but substantial and important for what it represented, the tyrannosauroid presence in Europe. The Wessex Formation on the Isle of Wight preserves a subtropical to warm temperate environment. Floodplains, braided rivers, forests along watercourses. Contemporary fauna included iguanodon, large ornithopods reaching several tons, smaller herbivores, armored dinosaurs, and other predators, including spinosaurs. Eotyrannus occupied a specific niche in this ecosystem, mid-sized predator, capable of taking medium herbivores, but avoiding direct competition with the larger spinosaurs that dominated waterways and coastal zones. The fossil material includes well-preserved limb bones. The proportions suggest good running ability, long tibiae relative to femora, a cursorial adaptation. Eotyrannus could move quickly, chase prey over moderate distances, deliver slashing bites to hamstrings or flanks, wait for blood loss to weaken the target. Not the overwhelming power strategy of later forms. Not yet. But effective for its size and role. The skull shows transitional features, more robust than Proceratosaurus or Dilong, less massive than Eotyrannus or the giants to come, somewhere in between, testing configurations, refining the design through natural selection operating across millions of years. Whether Eotyrannus had feathers is unknown. The preservation doesn't show them. But the climate would have been warm enough that extensive coverage might not have been necessary. Perhaps sparse feathering. Perhaps concentrated on certain body parts. Perhaps none at all in adults, though juveniles might have been covered. We simply don't know yet. More fossils may answer the question. What's certain is that by the early Cretaceous, tyrannosauroids had achieved broad geographic distribution. Asia, Europe, almost certainly North America, though the early Cretaceous fossil record there is poor. A family spreading, diversifying, occupying various niches across different continents. In Western China, another species was pushing the limits of specialization. 4 meters long, 250 kilograms. This was Zhongguanlong, and it was built for speed. The proportions are unusual even by tyrannosauroid standards. The legs are disproportionately long. The tibia, shin bone, is exceptionally elongated relative to the femur. This creates mechanical advantage for running. Long legs cover more ground per stride, allow higher top speeds, enable pursuit over distance. The body is relatively light. Narrow chest, reduced muscle mass in areas that don't contribute to running. Everything about Zhongguanlong suggests pursuit predator, not ambush, not power-based attacks, but chase. Run down prey across open ground, tire them out, deliver slicing bites that cause blood loss, follow until the target weakens. This strategy works best in open environments. And the Xinminbao group, where Zhongguanlong was found, represents exactly that. Semi-arid landscape, seasonal rivers, open woodlands with scattered conifers, grasslands, though again not true grasses yet, but low-growing ground cover serving the same ecological role. Prey included ornithopods, many of which were also built for speed. This created an evolutionary arms race, predator and prey both under selection pressure to run faster. Zhongguanlong represents one solution: maximum leg length, minimum body weight, speed prioritized over power. It worked for this species in this environment for millions of years. But it's notable that this strategy didn't persist in later tyrannosaurids. The giants that would eventually dominate, T. rex, Tarbosaurus, weren't built for pursuit. They were built for power. Zhongguanlong was an experiment, a branch on the tyrannosauroid family tree that explored one extreme of the design space, successful in its context, but not the path the lineage ultimately followed toward apex dominance. Evolution generates variation. Most variations don't persist. Some work for a time and then disappear. A few become foundations for future success. Zhongguanlong was the first type. Successful, but not foundational. Still, it demonstrates the family's flexibility. The willingness, evolutionarily speaking, to test different configurations. And that flexibility would prove valuable as environments changed and new challenges emerged. By 92 million years ago, the boundary between early and late Cretaceous, tyrannosaurs had established themselves across much of the northern hemisphere. But they still hadn't achieved the dominance they would later claim. Other predator families still occupied apex niches in many regions. Carcharodontosaurs in some areas, Spinosaurs in others, various mid-sized theropods filling mesopredator roles. The Tyrannosauroids were present, successful, but not yet the uncontested rulers. What they did have, though, was a set of advantages that would eventually tip the balance. And one of those advantages was developing inside their skulls. In Uzbekistan, in deposits representing the transition from early to late Cretaceous, a fossil was found that revealed something crucial. The fossil was fragmentary, partial skull, some vertebrae, limb elements. But the brain case, the portion of the skull that houses the brain, was exceptionally well preserved. This allowed detailed CT scanning, digital reconstruction of the brain cavity, analysis of internal structures. The species was Timolengia, 3 to 4 meters long, perhaps 170 kilograms, mid-sized. Not remarkable for its body size, but its brain was remarkable. Proportionally large relative to body size, larger than in earlier tyrannosauroids, approaching the proportions seen in T-Rex and other late-stage giants. The inner ear structure, particularly the cochlea and semicircular canals, was highly developed. This indicates enhanced hearing, the ability to detect low-frequency sounds across distances, the capacity to process complex auditory information. The semicircular canals control balance and spatial awareness. Well-developed canals suggest precise head movement control, useful for tracking moving prey, for delivering accurate strikes. The brain size, measured through endocranial volume, suggests enhanced cognitive capacity, not intelligence in the human sense, but perceptual sophistication, the ability to process complex sensory input, to navigate intricate environments, to solve problems. What Timolengia reveals is when these enhancements evolved. Not in the giants, not in T-Rex or Tarbosaurus. Earlier, in mid-sized species living 25 million years before the apex tyrannosaurids appeared. This makes evolutionary sense. Enhanced senses provide advantage at any size. Better hearing, better balance, better spatial processing. These are useful whether you're 170 kilograms or 6,000. So selection favored them early, in species like Timolengia. And when tyrannosauroids later increased dramatically in size, they inherited these advantages. The giants didn't invent enhanced sensory systems. They inherited them. The tools of dominance were forged in species that weren't yet dominant. This is often how evolution works. Innovations appear for one purpose, in one context. Later, they're co-opted for new purposes, repurposed as circumstances change. Feathers evolved for insulation. Later, in some lineages, they enabled flight. Enhanced senses evolved for hunting in mid-sized predators. Later, in giants, they enabled dominance. The early Cretaceous was a time of experimentation and refinement. Feathers provided insulation in cooling climates. Some species grew large, Eutyrannus, Sinotyrannus, testing apex predator sizes. Others stayed small but specialized, DeLong, Eotyrannus. Still others maximized specific traits, Zhongguanlong's speed, Timolengia's sensory systems. Variation, testing, natural selection operating on every generation. What worked persisted, what didn't vanished. And slowly, across 20 million years, the Tyrannosauroid lineage accumulated advantages. Larger body sizes, proven viable by multiple species. Enhanced senses, refined in forms like Timolengia. Powerful jaws, strengthened in each successive generation. Feather coverage that could be expanded or reduced as climate demanded. The pieces were assembling, not through conscious direction, not through plan, through the blind, patient mechanism of evolution, variation and selection, generation after generation. By the end of the early Cretaceous, Tyrannosauroids were no longer marginal. They occupied apex or near-apex roles in multiple ecosystems. They had achieved continental distribution. They had refined sensory and morphological adaptations that would characterize the family for the next 50 million years. They still weren't the largest predators everywhere. They still faced competition from other families. But the trajectory was set. The advantages were accumulated. The stage was prepared for what would come in the late Cretaceous: dominance. Not sudden, not through single innovations, through patient refinement of tools already possessed. From 5-kilogram Dilong in temperate Chinese forests to ton-and-a-half Yutyrannus hunting in winter snow. From specialized Xiongguanlong in semi-arid landscapes to perceptive Timolengia in Uzbekistan river valleys. 6 species, 6 strategies, 6 expressions of tyrannosaur evolution during a period of dramatic change, all successful, all contributing pieces to a larger pattern. The age of feathers was ending. Climate was warming again. The extensive feather coverage that had been advantageous in the cool early Cretaceous would become less beneficial as temperatures rose. Later tyrannosaurs, the giants, would lose most of their feathers, retain only sparse coverage, if any, optimize for heat dissipation rather than retention. But the other advantages, the enhanced senses, the powerful jaws, the refined hunting strategies, those would persist and be magnified. In the late Cretaceous, the Tyrannosauroids would finally rise, but they rose from here, from feathered hunters adapting to cooling climates, from species testing larger sizes and finding them viable, from lineages refining sensory systems that would later enable apex dominance. The age of feathers laid the foundation. The age of giants would build upon it. Chapter 3: Asian Dominance. The late Cretaceous began 80 million years ago. By this point, the world's continents had drifted into configurations approaching, but not yet matching, their modern positions. The Atlantic Ocean was wide. India had separated from Madagascar and was drifting northward toward its eventual collision with Asia. South America and Africa were fully separated. Australia was pulling away from Antarctica, and North America had been divided. The western interior seaway, a vast shallow sea, cut the continent in two. Eastern Appalachia and western Laramidia, separated by hundreds of kilometers of tropical water. This created isolated evolutionary theaters, different land masses, different climates, different ecological pressures, and consequently different evolutionary trajectories. In Asia, particularly, massive, diverse, partially isolated by seaways and mountain ranges, dinosaur evolution was generating remarkable diversity. And among the predators, the Tyrannosauroids were no longer marginal players. They had arrived. The climate had warmed from the cooler early Cretaceous. No ice anywhere on the planet. Tropical conditions extending nearly to the poles. Sea levels were the highest they had been in over 100 million years. The extensive feather coverage that had characterized early Cretaceous forms like Yutyrannus was no longer advantageous for large predators. Overheating became a risk. Insulation became a liability. Late Cretaceous Tyrannosauroids were predominantly scaled. If they retained feathers, it was sparse coverage, perhaps along the back for display, perhaps on juveniles before reaching adult size. But the loss of feathers didn't mean regression. The sensory enhancements inherited from species like Timolengia remained. The powerful jaw structures refined over millions of years persisted. The capacity for large body size, proven by Eutyrannus and Sinotyrannus, was now fully realized. Late Cretaceous Asia became home to some of the most formidable predators the continent had ever known. And among them, diversity flourished. Not one tyrannosaurid body plan, not one strategy, multiple species, multiple sizes, multiple approaches to predation. Some were gracile, lightly built, designed for speed and pursuit. Others were robust, heavily muscled, engineered for power and bone-crushing force. They competed with each other. They partitioned resources. They filled niches from the tropics to temperate zones. This was the age of Asian tyrannosaurid dominance. In the floodplains of late Cretaceous Mongolia, a particular strategy was proving successful. Not the largest body size, not the most powerful bite, but speed, agility, the ability to pursue and capture prey that the giants couldn't catch. This was the gracile approach, and one species exemplified it perfectly. 5 to 6 meters long, perhaps 400 kilograms. The skull was long and narrow, almost elegant in its proportions. The snout extended forward, creating a streamlined profile. The teeth were numerous, more than in robust forms, but individually smaller, designed for slicing, not crushing, and the skull bore ornamentation, 5 low bony ridges running along the top of the snout. Not massive, not dramatic like Guanlong's crest, but present, visible, probably for display, species recognition, perhaps sexual dimorphism, though we can't confirm that without multiple specimens showing clear variation. This was Alioramus. The body proportions reinforced the gracile build. Long hind limbs, proportionally longer than in robust tyrannosaurids. The tibia, shin bone, was especially elongated. This creates mechanical advantage for running. More ground covered per stride, higher potential top speeds. The torso was narrow, streamlined, not the barrel-chested build of power predators. Everything about Alioramus suggested pursuit hunter. The Nemegt Formation, where these fossils were found, represents an ideal environment for this strategy. River valleys, floodplains, open areas between forest patches. Prey included hadrosaurs, duck-billed dinosaurs traveling in herds. Some species exceeded several tons in mass as adults, but juveniles were smaller, faster, requiring different hunting techniques than adults. Alioramus targeted these younger animals and other mid-sized prey. Ornithomimids, ostrich-like dinosaurs built for speed. Protoceratopsids, small ceratopsians, sheep-sized, abundant. The pursuit strategy worked because Alioramus could sustain speed over distance. Not just explosive sprints, but chase, following prey across open ground, waiting for the target to tire, then closing for the strike. The narrow skull allowed precision, quick slicing bites to hamstrings, to flanks, causing damage, blood loss without requiring the predator to grapple with struggling prey. Hit and retreat, follow, repeat until the target weakened. This wasn't the overwhelming force approach that robust tyrannosaurids employed, but it was effective. And it allowed Alioramus to coexist with larger predators in the same ecosystem, because they weren't competing for the same prey. The robust forms, species like Tarbosaurus, which we'll encounter shortly, hunted adult hadrosaurs, large ceratopsians, prey requiring power to subdue. Alioramus hunted smaller, faster animals, prey requiring speed to catch, niche partitioning, different tools for different prey, different species occupying different roles. both successful, both sustained by the ecosystem's productivity. This pattern, gracile and robust forms coexisting, appears repeatedly in late Cretaceous Asian formations. Not competition driving one strategy to extinction, but complementary approaches, both viable, both maintained by natural selection. The Nemegt Formation preserves snapshots of this coexistence. Fossils of Alioramus, fossils of robust tyrannosaurids, fossils of their prey, all buried in the same sediments, all part of the same ecological community. 70 million years ago, these landscapes supported extraordinary diversity, not just in prey species, hadrosaurs, ceratopsians, ankylosaurs, ornithomimids, but in predators, multiple tyrannosaur species, smaller theropods, dromaeosaurs, troodontids, crocodilians along waterways. Competition was intense. Resources were finite, yet multiple large predators persisted. The key was specialization. Find your niche, exploit it efficiently. Avoid direct competition with species using different strategies. Alioramus did this successfully for millions of years. And its strategy wasn't unique to Mongolia. Thousands of kilometers south, in what would become southern China, another gracile tyrannosaurid was employing similar tactics. But this one carried the approach to an extreme. 9 meters long, 750 kilograms, larger than Alioramus, substantially larger, but built along the same principles. Long, narrow, streamlined. The skull was extraordinary. Nearly 60% of its length was snout. In most tyrannosaurids, the snout comprises about 50%. This created a profile that was almost comical, extended forward like a probe, narrow, elongated. The species earned a nickname from researchers, Pinocchio rex. The formal name is Tyrannosaurus, and that long snout served a purpose. Greater reach, the ability to strike from farther away, to access prey in positions that short-snouted predators couldn't. The teeth were closely spaced, numerous, blade-like with fine serrations, not designed for crushing, designed for clean cuts, precision strikes. The jaw mechanics were optimized for rapid closure, quick snapping bites rather than sustained crushing holds. This suggests hunting strategy, rapid strikes, multiple quick bites rather than one devastating chomp, slicing through muscle and hide, causing blood loss, following until prey weakened. The body proportions matched the skull, long legs, narrow build, reduced muscle mass in the forelimbs and shoulders, speed and agility over power. Tyrannosaurus lived in the final million years of the Cretaceous, 66 million years ago, right up to the end. The Ganzhou region where it was found was subtropical. River valleys, lakes, dense forests along watercourses. Prey diversity was exceptional. Multiple hadrosaur species, oviraptorosaurs. These were feathered omnivores, some quite large, filling roles now occupied by flightless birds. Various smaller herbivores and predators. Tyrannosaurus as the gracile specialist. Larger, robust forms, we'll meet them as the power hunters. The gracile strategy persisted right to the extinction. 70 million years in Mongolia with Alioramus, 66 million years in China with Tyrannosaurus, a span of 4 million years, multiple formations, multiple ecosystems. The approach worked, consistently, across varying environments. Not every tyrannosaurid needed to be a bone-crushing giant to succeed. Speed, precision and specialization were equally viable. But not all Asian tyrannosaurids are well understood. The late Cretaceous spans 30 million years. The fossil record from that interval is good in some regions, poor in others. Between well-sampled formations, between the richly fossiliferous sites that preserve dozens of complete specimens, are gaps. Millions of years where fossils are rare, fragmentary, difficult to interpret. And sometimes what we find in those gaps raises more questions than it answers. In deposits from Mongolia and northern China, dating to roughly 90 million years ago, fragmentary remains of a tyrannosaurid were discovered. Partial hind limbs, some vertebrae, fragments of the pelvis. Enough for identification, enough for approximate size estimation, 5 to 6 meters long, perhaps 400 to 500 kilograms. The fossils were named Electrosaurus. But beyond basic dimensions, we know little. The skull is unknown. We can't assess whether it was gracile or robust. We can't examine tooth morphology for dietary clues. We can't measure bite force or determine hunting strategy. The body proportions are partially reconstructible from the limb bones. Moderately built, not extremely gracile like Alioramus, not massively robust like the largest forms, somewhere in between. But that's inference based on fragmentary evidence. More fossils might change the interpretation. What Electrosaurus represents is a reminder. The fossil record is incomplete. For every species we know well, for every formation that preserves hundreds of specimens in exquisite detail, there are dozens of species known from scraps, a few bones, a partial skull, isolated teeth. These tell us this animal existed. It was approximately this size. It lived at this time in this place. But they don't tell us what it looked like in life, how it behaved, what precise role it occupied. Those details remain unknown. Perhaps future discoveries will illuminate them. Perhaps not. 90 million years ago, tyrannosaurids occupied ecosystems across Asia. Electrosaurus was one of them. Present, hunting, reproducing, succeeding for millions of years. We simply don't have the fossils to describe it fully, and we likely never will for many species. The further back in time, the more fragmentary the record becomes. Erosion destroys fossils. Geological processes obliterate formations. Entire landscapes from deep time have vanished, taking their fossil evidence with them. What remains is a sample, biased towards certain environments where preservation was likely. Floodplains, lakes, river deltas, places where sediment accumulated rapidly. Upland environments, mountainous regions, dry interiors far from water. Preservation there was rare. We have almost nothing from those settings. So our picture of late Cretaceous tyrannosaurid diversity is incomplete by necessity. We see what the fossil record shows us. We acknowledge what it doesn't. And Electrosaurus, fragmentary, mysterious, stands as evidence of both what we know and what we don't. While Asia hosted diverse tyrannosaurid faunas, North America's western half was developing its own. Laramidia, the landmass west of the interior seaway, stretched from the Arctic to Mexico, north to south, thousands of kilometers, multiple climate zones. And within that expanse, regional differences were emerging. Mountain ranges running north-south created barriers to dispersal. Climate gradients, Arctic in the north, subtropical in the south, further subdivided habitats. The result, different regions developed distinct faunas. Different hadrosaurs, different ceratopsians, different apex predators. In the southwestern region, what would become New Mexico, one tyrannosaurid was establishing dominance, 8 to 9 meters long, 1,500 to 2,000 kilograms. The skull was robust, deep jaws, powerful muscle attachment sites, large teeth designed for delivering crushing bites. This was Bistachiaverso. The name combines Navajo and Latin. Bistahi meaning large area of shale, referencing the Bisti Badlands where it was found. Eversor meaning destroyer, an apt description. Bistachiversa was built for power, not as large as the giants that would come later, not as massive as T-Rex or Tarbosaurus, but substantial. And in the Kirtland Formation ecosystem, 75 million years ago, it was apex. The prey base supported this. Hadrosaurs, Parasaurolophus with its elaborate cranial crest, large, heavily built ornithopods weighing several tons. Ceratopsians, Pentaceratops, one of the largest horned dinosaurs, exceeding 5 tons in adult mass. These were dangerous prey. The horns of Pentaceratops could gore. The bulk of adult hadrosaurs could crush. Bistachiaversa needed power to take them down. The skull structure delivered it. Short, deep snout creating mechanical advantage. Thick bone around the jaw joints. Massive temporalis muscles, the primary jaw-closing muscles. Bite force estimates exceed most contemporary predators. Not yet in T-Rex territory, but formidable. The teeth were built to match. Up to 10 centimeters in crown height, thick enamel, pronounced serrations. These could penetrate tough hide, could crack ribs, could access marrow when processing carcasses. The hunting strategy was probably ambush-based. Bistachiaversa wasn't built for sustained pursuit. The body proportions don't suggest exceptional speed. But explosive power? Yes. Wait in cover. Let prey approach. Launch from close range. Deliver a devastating bite. Use weight and strength to bring the target down. Once jaws made contact, the outcome was often decided. The Kirtland Formation was subtropical. Floodplains, meandering rivers, swamps and forests. Seasonal rains brought flooding. Dry seasons were mild but pronounced. This created rich, productive ecosystems, abundant plant growth, diverse herbivore communities, and predators to match. Bistachiaversa occupied the apex role here for several million years. Not the only large theropod, smaller predators existed, dromaeosaurs and others, but the largest, the most powerful, the king of this particular domain. Regional endemism was becoming a pattern across late Cretaceous Laramidia. To the north, in Montana and Alberta, different tyrannosaurids occupied apex roles. Different species, different specific adaptations. To the south, in New Mexico and potentially further into Mexico, Bistachiaversa and its relatives. Geographic barriers prevented mixing. Climate differences favored different adaptations. The result? A continent subdivided into evolutionary theaters, each developing distinct fauna, each producing its own apex predators. This pattern would intensify in the final 10 million years of the Cretaceous, but already, by 75 million years ago, it was visible. Different regions, different tyrannosaurids, all successful in their contexts. Even more isolated than Laramidia's southern reaches was the eastern landmass, Appalachia, separated from Laramidia by the interior seaway, hundreds of kilometers of ocean, no land bridge, no gene flow, completely isolated evolutionary theater. The fossil record from Appalachia is poor. The region was predominantly upland during the late Cretaceous, eroding rather than depositing sediment, mountains shedding material rather than accumulating it. What inland deposits existed have largely weathered away. What remains are fragmentary coastal sites, small windows into ecosystems that were vast. And in one of those windows, the Moorville Chalk of Alabama, a tyrannosaurid was found. fragmentary, a juvenile, not fully grown, but enough to confirm Tyrannosaurids occupied Appalachia. The species was named Appalachiosaurus. Size estimates for adults, based on the juvenile specimen and growth models, suggest 7 to 8 meters, perhaps 1,200 kilograms when fully grown, similar to Bistahevosaur, similar to mid-sized Laramidian forms, but isolated, separated from its relatives by an ocean. How long had the lineages been separated? We don't know precisely. The interior seaway formed gradually, fluctuated in extent. At times, land bridges may have connected the land masses. At others, complete separation. Gene flow was probably episodic, periodic connections allowing migration, long periods of isolation driving divergence. Appalachiosaurus represents one outcome of that process. A tyrannosaurid lineage isolated in Appalachia, evolving independently, developing its own characteristics. What those characteristics were in detail, we can't say. The fossil is incomplete, but the presence alone is significant. It confirms tyrannosaurids weren't confined to Laramidia and Asia. They occupied eastern North America too, and if one species existed, others probably did, in different time periods, in regions where fossils haven't been found. The Appalachian late Cretaceous is largely lost to us, eroded, gone. But Appalachiosaurus is a fragment of that lost world, a glimpse through a narrow window, proof that even where the fossil record fails, life was present, complex, diverse. Tyrannosaurs hunting along Appalachian coastal plains, pursuing hadrosaurs, avoiding larger predators. Spinosaurs were present in some regions, living, succeeding, for millions of years, then vanishing from the record, leaving only one juvenile skeleton in Alabama chalk. A reminder that most of history is unrecorded. Most species leave no trace, and even dominant predators, apex animals that shape their ecosystems for millions of years, can disappear from evidence nearly completely. By 75 million years ago, the Tyrannosauroid pattern was clear. They had achieved global distribution. Asia, North America, both eastern and western. Probably South America, though evidence is absent. Possibly Europe, though the fossil record is poor. They occupied apex or near-apex predator roles in most terrestrial ecosystems where they occurred. They had diversified into multiple strategies. Gracile pursuit hunters like Alioramus and Kianzusaurus. Robust power predators like Bistahevosaur. They had developed regional endemism, different species in different areas. Geographic isolation driving evolutionary divergence. And they had displaced or outlasted other predator families. The Carcharodontosaurs, dominant in some regions during the early Cretaceous, were gone by this point, their last representatives vanishing around 80 million years ago. Spinosaurs persisted in some areas, but were declining, restricted to specific habitats, no longer the widespread success they had been. Other theropod families remained: dromaeosaurs, troodontids, oviraptorosaurs. But these were smaller, mesopredators, not competing with tyrannosaurids for apex roles. The tyrannosaurids stood alone at the top, not through sudden conquest, not through catastrophic competition, through patient accumulation of advantages across 80 million years. Enhanced senses inherited from forms like Timolengia, powerful jaws refined through countless generations, adaptable body sizes, small like Dilong when necessary, large like Bistahevosaur when viable. Behavioral flexibility, solitary or social, pursuit or ambush, generalist or specialist as conditions demanded. These advantages, accumulated incrementally, had finally reached critical mass. The Tyrannosaurids were no longer rising. They had risen, but they weren't finished evolving. The final 10 million years of the Cretaceous would see further refinement, larger sizes, more specialized forms, regional adaptations pushed to extremes. The island-dwelling giants of Asia, the pack-hunting specialists of Alberta, the bone-crushing titan of Montana. Those stories lay ahead. For now, across late Cretaceous Asia and the Americas, tyrannosaurs had claimed their throne. Gracile Alioramus in Mongolian river valleys, long-snouted Qianzousaurus in Chinese forests, fragmentary Electrosaurus in poorly known ecosystems, powerful Bistahioversor in New Mexican floodplains, isolated Appalachiosaurus on eastern coastal plains. 5 species in this chapter, 5 expressions of late Cretaceous tyrannosaur success. Different sizes, different strategies, different levels of preservation, but all apex predators, all dominant in their respective worlds, all demonstrating that the tyrannosaur family had achieved what their Jurassic ancestors could only aspire to. Not survival in the margins, dominance at the center. The humble origins were 100 million years past. The age of giants was beginning. Chapter 4. Arctic Hunters. The late Cretaceous world was warm, warmer than today, warmer than any period in the last 65 million years. No ice sheets existed, not at the poles, not on mountaintops, nowhere. The Arctic Ocean was ice-free year-round. Antarctica, though positioned over the South Pole, supported forests. Temperate forests with seasonal leaf drop, but forests nonetheless. Global temperatures averaged perhaps 15 degrees Celsius, warmer than the present. This warmth was driven by multiple factors. High atmospheric carbon dioxide from volcanic activity, ocean currents distributing heat efficiently, continental configurations that prevented the isolation of polar regions. The result? A planet where tropical conditions extended far beyond the equator, where even high latitudes experienced mild climates. But mild is relative. Even in a greenhouse world, physics imposes constraints. At high latitudes, 70, 80, 85 degrees north, seasonal light variation cannot be escaped. The Earth's axial tilt remains constant. During winter, polar regions receive little to no direct sunlight. During summer, the sun barely sets. In the late Cretaceous Arctic, this meant weeks of twilight in winter, weeks of continuous daylight in summer. And while temperatures remained above freezing for much of the year, no permafrost, no glaciers, winter brought genuine cold. Snow fell, rivers froze temporarily, plant growth ceased, productivity dropped. Any animal living at these latitudes faced challenges unknown to their southern relatives. Seasonal resource scarcity, extended darkness, cold that, while not extreme by modern standards, was still significant for active predators. And yet, the fossil record confirms dinosaurs lived there, not just passing through, not just migrants fleeing winter, permanent residents, species adapted to Arctic conditions, breeding at high latitudes, enduring seasonal extremes. In what would become northern Alaska, the North Slope along the Arctic Ocean, deposits from the late Cretaceous preserve this polar fauna. The Prince Creek Formation and related units, 70 million years ago. Latitude approximately 80 to 85 degrees north. Well within the Arctic Circle, the fossils show a complete ecosystem. Hadrosaurs, duck-billed dinosaurs adapted to browsing in environments with seasonal plant dieback. Ceratopsians, stocky, heavily built herbivores with elaborate nasal bosses, small ornithopods, ankylosaurs, various smaller dinosaurs, and predators. Dromaeosaurs with enhanced night vision for hunting in low light, troodontids with similar adaptations, and tyrannosaurids. Not just present, not just marginal. Apex predators, dominant carnivores even here at the edge of the world, but adapted. The Arctic tyrannosaurs were smaller than their southern relatives, not juveniles, adults, fully grown animals with fused bones and mature skeletal features, but small, 5 to 6 meters long, perhaps 900 kilograms. Compare this to contemporary southern tyrannosaurids, species like Bistahevosaur at 2,000 kilograms, or the giants we'll encounter later at 5 or 6,000. The size disparity is significant, and it tells a story about constraints. The phenomenon is called insular dwarfism, or in this case, perhaps peninsular dwarfism. When populations become isolated, on islands, on peninsulas, in regions with limited resources, selection often favors smaller body size. Smaller animals require fewer calories. They can sustain populations on less abundant prey. They reach reproductive maturity faster, allowing quicker generation turnover. In resource-limited environments, these advantages outweigh the benefits of large size. The Arctic wasn't an island, but it was isolated. Geographic barriers, mountains, climate zones, seasonal migration routes created partial isolation from southern populations. Gene flow was reduced. Arctic populations became somewhat distinct. And in the resource-limited Arctic environment, where productivity dropped severely in winter, smaller body size was advantageous. The Arctic Tyrannosaurid embodied this adaptation. The species was named Nanuqsaurus. Nanook, the Inupiat word for polar bear, an appropriate comparison. Modern polar bears are the Arctic's apex predator, adapted to extreme conditions, surviving where few other large carnivores can. Nanuqsaurus played that role 70 million years ago. The skull morphology was similar to other tyrannosaurids. Robust, deep jaws, large teeth, built for powerful biting. The proportions suggested this wasn't a gracile pursuit, hunter-like Alioramus. This was a power predator, just scaled down. The strategy remained overwhelming force delivered through the jaws, but adjusted for prey size and environmental constraints. In the Arctic ecosystem, the largest herbivores were hadrosaurs. Species like Ugrunaluk, a polar specialist itself, 7 to 9 meters long. Adult hadrosaurs of this size weighed 1,500 to 2,000 kilograms. A 900-kilogram tyrannosaur hunting prey twice its mass required strategy. Not frontal assault on healthy adults, but targeting vulnerability, juveniles, elderly individuals, animals weakened by winter cold or disease, targets that couldn't effectively resist. The Arctic winter made this viable. When temperatures dropped and food became scarce, herbivores weakened. Their condition deteriorated. They became vulnerable. A predator that could remain active in cold conditions, that could maintain body temperature and hunting effectiveness, had access to prey that would be unavailable in warmer seasons. Whether Nanuqsaurus migrated or remained year-round is debated. Arguments for migration, following hadrosaur herds south in winter, returning north in summer to exploit seasonal abundance. Arguments against. The energetic cost of migration is substantial. 900 kilograms is large enough to endure winter conditions through reduced metabolism and scavenging. Possibly both strategies were employed, different individuals making different choices. behavioral flexibility providing advantage. Young animals might migrate with herds. Older, established individuals might remain in territories. Pregnant females might seek southern regions for giving birth. We don't know with certainty. Behavior doesn't fossilize, but the presence of Nanosaurus bones in Arctic deposits confirms. At least some individuals, at least some of the time, were present at extreme latitudes, living where most tyrannosaurids could not, succeeding in conditions that would challenge any large predator. The polar bear analogy extends beyond the name. Modern polar bears are smaller than their brown bear ancestors, adapted to an environment where large size is less advantageous than cold tolerance and efficiency. Nanosaurus followed the same pattern, smaller than southern tyrannosaurs, but adapted, successful, occupying an apex role that no other large predator filled. Sometimes survival isn't about being the biggest, it's about being suited to your environment. And in the Arctic twilight of the late Cretaceous, Nanosaurus was perfectly suited. While the Arctic represented one extreme of tyrannosaurid adaptation, other regions were seeing different innovations. The Tyrannosaur fossil record has gaps, periods where specimens are rare, formations that preserve few carnivore remains, intervals spanning millions of years with fragmentary evidence. One such gap exists in the mid to late Campanian stage of the late Cretaceous, roughly 80 to 75 million years ago. Before this period, we have early Cretaceous forms like Timolengia and Aotyrannus, transitional species testing larger sizes. After this period, we have the giants, T. rex and its relatives, fully realized apex predators. But the interval between, the 15 million years when the transition occurred, is poorly sampled. A few formations preserve glimpses, a few species fill portions of the gap, and one of the most important comes from southern Utah, the Wah-Weep Formation, 80 million years ago. A floodplain environment, rivers draining from highlands toward the western interior seaway, subtropical climate with seasonal wet and dry periods. And in these deposits, a tyrannosaurid that demonstrates the transition was already well underway. 8 meters long, 2,500 kilograms, substantially larger than Nanosaurus, larger than the mid-sized forms like Bistahieversaur, approaching the dimensions that would characterize the final giants. The species was named Lithranax. The name means Gore King. Lithron meaning blood or gore in Greek, anax meaning king. Appropriate for an apex predator. Though the name undersells what makes Lithranax significant, it's not the size alone, it's the features. The skull is exceptionally well preserved, and it shows characteristics previously thought to be late-stage innovations. The posterior portion of the skull, the area behind the eyes, is proportionally wide, wider than in earlier tyrannosaurids, wider than would be expected for an 80-million-year-old species. This creates a broad, powerful skull shape, and it affects vision. The eyes are positioned more forward-facing than in narrow-skulled forms. The visual fields overlap more extensively. This enhances binocular vision. Depth perception, the ability to judge distance accurately, critical for any predator, especially important for ambush hunters targeting specific strike zones on large prey. The wide skull also provides more space for jaw muscle attachment. Larger muscles, greater bite force. The teeth, robust, heavily serrated, were designed to deliver and withstand powerful bites. Everything about Lithranax's skull suggests this was a power predator, built to overwhelm prey through force. And these features, wide skull, enhanced binocular vision, massive bite force, would characterize all later tyrannosaurians, the subfamily that includes T-Rex, Tarbosaurus, and other late-stage giants. Lithranax sits near the base of that group, which means these key features evolved earlier than previously thought. By 80 million years ago, the blueprint was established. The species that followed would refine it, increase size, optimize proportions, but the fundamental design was already present. This changes how we understand tyrannosaurid evolution. It wasn't a gradual accumulation of features over the final 10 million years. The critical innovations appeared earlier, in forms like Lithranax, and then persisted, were maintained by selection, were magnified as body size increased. Lithranax lived in a productive ecosystem. The Warweep Formation preserves diverse fauna, multiple hadrosaur species, early ceratopsians, ankylosaurs, smaller herbivores, and predators to match. Lithranax as apex, smaller theropods in mesopredator roles. The prey base could support a large predator, and Lithranax exploited it effectively, hunting juvenile hadrosaurs, targeting ceratopsians, scavenging when opportunity arose. The powerful jaws allowed processing of carcasses other predators might abandon, crushing bone, accessing marrow, extracting maximum nutrition from kills. This efficiency mattered. In competitive environments, where multiple predator species vie for resources, the ability to utilize prey completely provides advantage. Lithranax succeeded for millions of years, and its descendants, species refining the design it pioneered, would dominate for the next 15 million. The blueprint for dominance was drawn in southern Utah 80 million years ago. Not far from where Lithranax hunted, in time or space, another tyrannosaur was establishing itself. Slightly younger, 76 million years ago, the Tyrannosaurowitz Formation, also southern Utah, similar environment but a few million years later. This species was smaller than Lithranax, 6 to 7 meters, perhaps 1,200 kilograms, but it possessed something unusual. The skull was proportionally short, abbreviated compared to other tyrannosaurids of similar body size. The snout was deep but compressed front to back, creating an almost stocky appearance. This wasn't aesthetic, it was functional. A shorter snout increases mechanical advantage for jaw muscles. More force can be generated per unit of muscle contraction. The trade-off: reduced reach. A long-snouted predator can strike from farther away, can access difficult positions. But this species prioritized power over reach. The teeth confirmed this interpretation. Large, robust, up to 9 centimeters in crown height, extremely thick enamel, pronounced serrations. These were bone-crushing teeth, designed not just to pierce flesh, but to fracture skeletal elements. The species was named Teratophaneus. The name means monstrous murderer. Teras meaning monster, Phoneus meaning murderer. Hyperbolic, perhaps, but it conveys function. Teratophaneus could process carcasses more completely than most tyrannosaurids. The powerful jaws and robust teeth allowed access to marrow, breaking open long bones, crushing ribs to reach organs. This created competitive advantage. In the Tyrannosaurowitz ecosystem, rich in herbivores but also in competing predators, the ability to extract maximum nutrition from kills was valuable. A carcass that a gracile predator might abandon after stripping surface meat could sustain Teratophaneus for days. The bone-crushing capability also opened scavenging opportunities, kills made by other predators. animals dead from disease or injury, carcasses that had been partially consumed. Teratophonius could access resources in these that competitors couldn't, the Kyparoids. Formation preserves exceptional diversity. At least 3 hadrosaur species, multiple ceratopsians, including Cosmoceratops and Utaceratops, bizarre horned dinosaurs with elaborate frills, ankylosaurs, smaller ornithopods, rich herbivore communities, and predators, Teratophonius as apex, various smaller theropods, crocodilians along watercourses. Competition was intense, niches were full. In this context, specialization mattered. Teratophonius didn't try to outcompete other predators at their strategies. It developed its own power, bone crushing, complete carcass utilization, tools refined for a specific role, and success in that role meant survival. The pattern repeats across late Cretaceous North America. Different regions, different tyrannosaurid species, each adapted to local conditions, each specialized for particular strategies. In the south, another tyrannosaur was demonstrating this regional variation, slightly older than Teratophonius, contemporary with Lithranax, 80 million years ago in what would become New Mexico. The Menifee Formation, coastal plain environment near the western interior seaway, and a tyrannosaurid that continued the trend toward large size and powerful build, 8 to 9 meters long, 1,500 to 2,000 kilograms, similar dimensions to Bistachioversa, which lived in nearby regions a few million years later. This suggests continuity, a lineage of southern Laramidian apex predators, occupying similar ecological roles across time. The species was named Dynamoterra. The name combines Greek roots, dynamo meaning powerful, terra referencing the family name. Powerful terra, straightforward, accurate. The fossil material is partial, portions of skull, vertebrae, hindlimb elements, enough for confident identification and size estimation. Not enough for complete behavioral reconstruction. But what's present is informative. The skull fragments show robust construction, thick bones, large teeth. The vertebrae show pneumatization, air spaces within bone. This reduces weight without sacrificing strength, a common feature in theropods, allows large body size without proportional mass increase. The hind limb elements suggest powerful legs, thick femur, robust ankle bones, built for supporting significant mass and delivering force during attacks. The overall picture, a large, powerful tyrannosaurid, standard late Cretaceous apex predator morphology. What makes Dynamoterra particularly significant is its age and position. At 80 million years old, it's contemporary with Lithranax. Both represent the emergence of large-bodied tyrannosaurids in the Campanian stage. And both suggest that by this time, tyrannosaurids had achieved broad geographic distribution across Laramedia. Northern regions hosting early forms of what would become Daspletosaurus and related species. Southern regions hosting Dynamoterra, Bistachioversa, and their relatives. Arctic regions, hosting Nanuqsaurus and its adaptations. A continent-wide radiation, multiple lineages, regional variation developing. This is the pattern of a successful, adaptable family. The Menifee Formation environment supported this success. Rivers draining toward the seaway, floodplains, swamps, forests along watercourses, subtropical climate, seasonal rains, rich productivity. Herbivores included hadrosaurs, common throughout Laramidia, ceratopsians, ankylosaurs, smaller ornithopods, and Dynamoterra as apex, the largest predator, the top of the food chain, not through novelty, not through unique innovations, through refining a proven strategy: large body size, powerful jaws, apex predator ecology. The same approach employed by tyrannosaurids across continents. Because it worked. Natural selection doesn't favor creativity for its own sake. It favors effectiveness. And the tyrannosaurid apex predator configuration, established through 80 million years of evolution, refined in species like Lithranax and Dinosaur, was effective. By 75 million years ago, the pattern was clear. Tyrannosaurids dominated terrestrial predator niches across the northern hemisphere, from the Arctic to the subtropics, from coastal plains to inland basins, from floodplains to upland forests. And they had diversified to match local conditions. Small Arctic specialists like Nanoxaurus, large southern forms like Dinosaur, power-focused species like Teratophonius, early giants like Lithranax establishing the template for what would follow. Regional variation, local adaptation, geographic endemism, but unified by shared heritage, enhanced senses inherited from earlier forms, powerful jaws refined across generations, adaptable body plans that could scale from 900 kilograms to several tons. These advantages, accumulated incrementally over millions of years, had secured dominance. Other large theropod families were gone or restricted. Carcharodontosaurs extinct, Spinosaurs declining, Abelisaurs confined to southern continents. Tyrannosaurids stood alone. And they weren't finished evolving. The final 10 million years of the Cretaceous would see the apex of their radiation, larger sizes still, more specialized forms, behavioral adaptations pushed to extremes. The pack hunters of Alberta, the island giants of Asia, the ultimate bone crusher of Montana. Those developments lay ahead. For now, across the varied landscapes of late Cretaceous Laramidia and beyond, tyrannosaurs had claimed their position. Nanoxaurus in Arctic twilight, Lithranax establishing new morphology in Utah, Teratophonius crushing bone in southern floodplains, Dinosaur continuing southern apex lineages. 4 species, 4 expressions of regional adaptation, 4 variations on a proven theme, all successful, all dominant, all demonstrating the family's remarkable flexibility, from pole to subtropics, from resource scarcity to abundance, from extreme cold to moderate warmth. Wherever large terrestrial predators could exist, tyrannosaurids had established themselves. Not the humble hunters of the Jurassic, not the marginal mesopredators of the early Cretaceous. Kings, unchallenged, refined by millions of years of selection. The age of giants had arrived, and it would culminate in forms that exceeded even these. But that culmination was built here, on Arctic adaptations and southern power, on enhanced vision and bone-crushing jaws, on regional specialists and continental dominance. The foundation was complete. The final chapter would simply be amplification. Chapter 5. Island Giants. 75 million years ago, the continents had drifted into configurations recognizably close to their modern positions, but not identical. India was still an island, racing northward toward its eventual collision with Asia. Australia had separated from Antarctica, but remained close. South America and Africa were fully divided, though their shapes were different, narrower, less familiar. And Asia, vast, diverse, partially isolated by seaways and mountain ranges. The Tethys Sea, a great tropical ocean, separated the northern continents from the southern. Shallow seas divided land masses that would later connect. Mountain building was active. The future Himalayas were beginning their rise as island terrains collided with the Asian mainland. This geographic complexity created evolutionary laboratories, isolated landmasses, reduced gene flow between populations, different ecological pressures in different regions. The result? Endemism. Distinct species evolving in isolation, adaptations specific to local conditions. And in late Cretaceous Asia, this endemism produced some of the most remarkable tyrannosaurids that ever lived. Not the most famous, not the species that dominate popular culture, but among the largest, among the most specialized, among the most successful in their particular contexts. The island giants. The term island giant might seem contradictory. Islands typically produce dwarfism. Limited resources favor smaller body sizes. We see this in modern animals and in fossil species like Nanosaurus. But the pattern isn't universal. Sometimes when large predators are absent, herbivores on islands grow larger. And when they do, predators can grow large to match. Or when continents fragment, creating large isolated landmasses, not true islands, but peninsulas or regions separated by shallow seas. The dynamics change. Resources remain abundant. Prey diversity stays high. But gene flow with distant populations reduces. In these conditions, local adaptations intensify. Gigantism can evolve. Specializations can develop that wouldn't be viable in more connected populations. Late Cretaceous Asia was exactly this kind of environment. Massive landmass, rich ecosystems, productive floodplains and river valleys, diverse herbivore communities, but partially isolated from other regions by geography and climate. And in this context, tyrannosaurids reached their apex, not just in body, size, though some approached the dimensions of T. rex itself, but in specialization, in diversity, in the sheer number of distinct species occupying different niches across the continent. The Nemegt Formation in Mongolia preserves one of the richest late Cretaceous ecosystems known. 70 million years ago. River valleys cutting through floodplains, seasonal rains bringing floods, dry periods creating concentrations of animals around permanent water sources. The herbivore diversity was extraordinary. Hadrosaurs, at least 3 species, ranging from 7 to 10 meters in length. Duck-billed dinosaurs traveling in herds, browsing on vegetation along riverbanks and in forests. Sauropods, smaller than their Jurassic ancestors but still substantial. Opisthochelicordia and related forms, reaching 12 to 15 meters. Slow-moving, vulnerable when isolated from herds. Ankylosaurs, armored dinosaurs with clubbed tails. Defensive herbivores weighing several tons. Ceratopsians, early forms, smaller than the giants of North America, but present. Protoceratops was abundant, sheep-sized, traveling in groups. And ruling over this abundance was the apex predator of late Cretaceous Mongolia, 10 to 12 meters long, 4 to 5,000 kilograms, rivaling T. rex in size. Built along nearly identical lines, the same massive skull, the same powerful jaws, the same reduced forelimbs. This was Tarbosaurus bata. The name means alarming lizard, a somewhat underwhelming translation for one of the largest terrestrial predators ever known. But names aside, Tarbosaurus was formidable. Multiple complete skeletons have been found. Adults, subadults, juveniles. This gives us unusual insight into growth patterns, individual variation, and ontogenetic changes. We know more about Tarbosaurus than almost any Asian theropod. The skull was massive, over a meter in length in large adults. Deep jaws, robust construction, powerful muscle attachment sites. Bite force estimates approach those of T-Rex. Not quite matching. The skull proportions are slightly different, slightly less robust, but close. Easily in the upper tier of all known predators. The teeth were large, some exceeding 10 centimeters in crown height, thick enamel, pronounced serrations along both edges, designed to deliver crushing bites, to penetrate tough hide, to fracture bone when necessary. The body proportions matched the skull's promise. Barrel-chested torso, powerful. Hind limbs with thick femora, thigh bones, and robust tibiae. Built to support 5 tons of mass and deliver force during attacks. The tail was long and heavy, counterbalancing the massive head and torso, providing stability during movement and strikes. And the arms, tiny, 2 fingers on each hand, so reduced that their function remains debated. Not for grasping prey. They couldn't reach anything in front of the animal's mouth. Not for manipulation of food. Too weak, too poorly positioned, possibly for leverage when rising from a prone position. Possibly for display. Possibly vestigial remnants of structures that were functional in earlier ancestors. Whatever their purpose, they were minimally important to the animal's success. All hunting, all killing, all feeding, done with the jaws. Tarbosaurus hunted the full range of nemagged herbivores. Juvenile hadrosaurs were probably preferred. Large enough to provide substantial calories. Young enough to be less dangerous than adults. But adults were taken when opportunity arose. The bite force was sufficient. The size disparity manageable for a 5-ton predator. Sauropods represented challenging prey. Even the smaller late Cretaceous species weighed several tons. But juveniles, elderly individuals, animals separated from herds, these were vulnerable. The hunting strategy was probably ambush-based or short pursuit. Tarbosaurus wasn't built for long-distance running. The body proportions don't suggest cursorial specialization. The mass was too great for sustained speed. But explosive acceleration over short distances? Yes. Wait in cover or patrol likely routes. Let prey approach. Launch from close range. Close the distance in seconds. Deliver a devastating bite. Once jaws made contact, the outcome was often decided. The bite force could crush limbs, could fracture ribs, could sever spinal columns if the angle was right. Prey either died quickly or was disabled, weakened, unable to flee effectively, and a predator weighing 5 tons could afford to wait. Follow. Track until blood loss or shock finished the work. What makes Tarbosaurus particularly significant is what it represents evolutionarily. It's essentially the Asian version of T-Rex. Not ancestral to T-Rex, they're not in a direct lineage. They're sister taxa, related species that diverged from a common ancestor millions of years earlier. But they evolved the same solution, same massive skull, same powerful build, same apex predator ecology. This is convergent evolution writ large, or more accurately, parallel evolution. Related lineages facing similar challenges evolving similar solutions. In Asia, Tarbosaurus. In North America, T-Rex. The common ancestor lived perhaps 90 million years ago, before the lineages geographically separated. Then continental drift, rising seaways, climate differences, geographic isolation. Asia went one direction, North America another. And over millions of years independently, both lineages produced apex predators of nearly identical design. Because the ecological role was the same: large herbivores requiring power to subdue, competitive environments favoring specialists. The physics of the problem demanded similar solutions. Tarbosaurus ruled the Tatimite-Nemegt ecosystem for several million years. Unchallenged, the largest predator, the most powerful, until 66 million years ago, when the asteroid struck and the age of non-avian dinosaurs ended. Further east, in what would become eastern China, another massive tyrannosaur was establishing itself, slightly earlier than Tarbosaurus, 73 million years ago. The Guangxi group in Shandong province, coastal plain and floodplain environments, subtropical climate, rich productivity, and a tyrannosaur that may have exceeded even Tarbosaurus in size, 11 meters long. Mass estimates approach 6,000 kilograms. This was Jucheng magnus. The name means Great Tyrant from Jucheng, Jucheng being the city near the discovery site. The fossil material is incomplete. Partial skull, some vertebrae, portions of hind limbs, not enough for complete reconstruction, but enough for confident size estimation and taxonomic identification. And what's present suggests this was among the largest tyrannosaurids known. The skull fragments are massive, robust, heavily constructed. The maxilla, the upper jawbone, shows attachment sites for enormous jaw muscles. The teeth are large even by tyrannosaurid standards. This was a power predator taken to an extreme. Why so large? The prey base likely provided the answer. The Jucheng region during the late Cretaceous was exceptionally productive. Some deposits preserve extraordinary densities of hadrosaur bones, mass death assemblages, thousands of individuals in relatively small areas. This suggests massive herds, seasonal aggregations around water sources, or breeding grounds. For a predator, this represents opportunity. Large body size becomes advantageous when prey is abundant and substantial. A 6-ton predator can take larger individual prey, can dominate kills, can drive smaller predators away from carcasses. In an environment rich with multi-ton hadrosaurs, being the largest predator mattered. Jucheng tyrannus was that predator, the apex of Asian tyrannosaurid gigantism, the extreme expression of the family's trend towards size and power. Not all late Cretaceous Asian tyrannosaurs were giants. In the same Nemegt formation that preserved Tarbosaurus, another tyrannosaur fossil was found, slightly smaller, 6 meters long, perhaps 400 kilograms, different proportions from the larger species, more gracile build, longer legs relative to body size. This was Alioramus altai, a second species of the gracile Alioramus lineage, distinct from Alioramus remotus, but similar in overall morphology and ecology. The skull was longer and narrower than Tarbosaurus. The snout extended forward. The teeth were more numerous but individually smaller, built for precision and speed rather than overwhelming power. And like its relative, it bore ornamentation, bony ridges along the snout, low, subtle, but present, almost certainly for display, recognition, communication within the species. The coexistence of Alioramus altai and Tarbosaurus in the same formation is significant. 2 tyrannosaur species, same time, same place, same general habitat, yet both successful, both leaving fossils across multiple sites, both persisting for millions of years. This confirms niche partitioning. Tarbosaurus hunted large, powerful prey. adult hadrosaurs, sauropods, heavily built herbivores requiring overwhelming force. Alioramus altai hunted smaller, faster prey. Juvenile hadrosaurs, ornithomimids, protoceratops, animals requiring pursuit rather than power. Different strategies, different prey, different hunting techniques, both viable, both maintained by selection, both contributing to ecosystem function. Diversity was the hallmark of late Cretaceous Asian tyrannosaurids. Not one apex predator strategy, not dominance through uniformity, but multiple approaches, multiple species, multiple niches filled. Giants like Tarbosaurus and Juchengtyrannus dominating through size and power. Gracile forms like Alioramus altai and Qianzhusaurus succeeding through speed and precision. Regional specialists adapted to local conditions across the vast Asian continent. And one final species deserves mention, though its status remains debated. From early Cretaceous China, much earlier than the other species in this chapter, a small tyrannosaur fossil was discovered, 3 meters long, perhaps 60 kilograms. But its proportions were remarkable. The skull was large relative to body size. The jaws were powerful. The teeth were robust. It looked like a scaled-down T-Rex. The same basic body plan, the same proportions, just miniaturized. The species was named Raptorex. Initially, this seemed significant. It suggested the tyrannosaurid apex predator design, massive skull, powerful jaws, reduced arms, evolved early, in small species, then was simply scaled up over time. A prototype, a blueprint tested at small size before being magnified. But further study raised questions. The bone histology, microstructure, showed patterns consistent with a juvenile, not a mature adult. The fusion patterns in the skeletons suggested active growth. This individual hadn't reached full size. And the proportions. Large-headed, relatively short-legged, these are characteristic of young tyrannosaurs. Adults have different proportions, more elongated limbs, different skull-to-body ratios. Time ones. The current interpretation, Raptorex is probably a juvenile of a larger species, possibly a juvenile Tarbosaurus, possibly a related but distinct species. We don't know for certain. But the idea that it represents a distinct small-bodied apex predator has largely been abandoned, not through malice or error, just through science doing what science does, self-correcting when new evidence emerges. Still, Raptorex serves a purpose in this narrative. It reminds us our understanding is provisional, based on available evidence, subject to revision. Fossils don't come with labels. Interpretation requires careful analysis, and sometimes that analysis changes as techniques improve. What remains certain? Late Cretaceous Asia hosted remarkable tyrannosaurid diversity. From 60-kilogram juveniles, whatever species they belonged to 6,000-kilogram giants like Juchengtyrannus. From gracile pursuit hunters to robust bone crushers. The island giants weren't isolated curiosities. They were expressions of evolutionary success in partially isolated ecosystems. Asia's geographic complexity, mountain ranges, seaways, vast distances, created opportunities for diversification, and the tyrannosaurids exploited those opportunities fully. Tarbosaurus in Mongolia, Juchengtyrannus in eastern China, gracile specialists like Alioramus across multiple formations, different species, different regions, different specializations, but all successful, all dominant in their respective contexts. By 66 million years ago, Asian tyrannosaurids had achieved peak diversity. More species than at any previous time. Wider geographic distribution. Greater ecological specialization. They had solved the problem of apex predation in multiple ways. Power through gigantism. Efficiency through speed. Adaptability through behavioral flexibility. And across the ocean, in North America, parallel processes were occurring. Different species, different lineages, but similar outcomes. The final 10 million years of the Cretaceous would see both continents hosting their largest, most specialized tyrannosaurids. Asia, with Tarbosaurus and its kin. North America, with species we haven't yet fully explored. Giants on opposite sides of the planet, never meeting, never competing, but filling the same role, employing the same solutions. Because evolution, given similar challenges, finds similar answers. And the challenge of being an apex predator among multi-ton herbivores demanded massive size, powerful jaws, robust build. Asia found that answer in Tarbosaurus. North America would find it in forms even more formidable. But before we turn to those final giants, we can appreciate what the island giants of Asia achieved. Not through novelty, not through unique innovations unavailable to other lineages, through refinement, through specialization, through millions of years of selection optimizing body plan for function. Tarbosaurus was nearly as large as T-Rex. Zhuchengtyrannus may have equaled it. These weren't lesser cousins. They weren't second-tier predators. They were apex, dominant, perfected for their roles. And for 5 million years they ruled, until the asteroid struck. Time, 0.5s, until the age ended, until all the giants, Asian and American alike, vanished into deep time. The island giants left their mark in stone, multiple complete skeletons, rich fossil sites, enough evidence to reconstruct their lives in unusual detail. We know how large they grew, what they ate, how they hunted, how they coexisted with other predators. We know they succeeded, for millions of years, in ecosystems as complex and competitive as any that have existed. And we know that when the final chapter of the Mesozoic closed, they were still there, still dominant, still successful, still the unchallenged kings of late Cretaceous Asia. Not declining, not being displaced, not fading, thriving, until everything ended. Chapter 6. American Rise. While Asia hosted its giants, North America was undergoing its own evolutionary revolution. Laramidia, the western half of the continent, isolated by the interior seaway, stretched from the Arctic to Mexico, thousands of kilometers, multiple climate zones, diverse ecosystems. And within this vast landmass, geographic barriers were creating subdivisions. The Sevier Highlands, a mountain range running roughly north-south through what would become Utah and Nevada, created a barrier to dispersal, not impassable. Animals could cross. Gene flow occurred, but reduced, filtered, enough to create distinct regional populations. Climate gradients reinforced these divisions. Arctic conditions in the north, temperate zones in the middle latitudes, subtropical environments in the south, different temperatures, different seasonal patterns, different vegetation communities. The result? Laramidia functioned not as one unified ecosystem, but as a series of partially isolated evolutionary theaters. Northern regions developing their own fauna, southern regions evolving distinct species, endemism becoming the pattern. And in the northern reaches, what would become Montana, Alberta, Wyoming, Saskatchewan, the final chapter of Tyrannosaurid evolution was beginning to unfold. This was where the family would reach its ultimate expression. Not suddenly, not through revolutionary change, through refinement, through incremental improvements across millions of years. The species that emerged in northern Laramidia between 77 and 68 million years ago represent the apex of Tyrannosaurid evolution. Not just in size, though some would become the largest terrestrial predators known, but in specialization, in sensory sophistication, in hunting effectiveness. These were the species that would define what tyrannosaur means in the popular imagination. The bone crushers, the giants, the ultimate apex predators. 77 million years ago, in the coastal plains and river valleys of what would become Montana and Alberta, a new tyrannosaurid was establishing dominance. Larger than most species that had come before, 9 meters long, 3,000 to 3,800 kilograms. The skull was massive, robust, built along the same principles we saw in Lithranax: wide posterior, enhanced binocular vision, powerful jaw muscles, but refined, optimized, taken further. The teeth were enormous, some exceeding 12 centimeters in crown height, thick enamel, heavy serrations, reinforced structures that could withstand tremendous forces. These weren't just for piercing flesh, they were for crushing bone. This was Daspletosaurus turosus. The name means frightful muscular lizard, a reference to the robust build and pronounced muscle attachment sites visible on the fossil bones. Multiple specimens have been found: adults, subadults, juveniles of various ages. This gives us insight into growth patterns, into how the species changed from hatching to maturity. And what's clear is this: Daspletosaurus grew large and grew powerful. Juveniles started small, perhaps a meter long at hatching, weighing a few kilograms. At this size, they couldn't hunt large prey. They occupied different ecological niches than adults. Smaller prey, different strategies. This is called ontogenetic niche shifting. The young and old of the same species functioning almost as different species ecologically. As they grew, their proportions changed. Juveniles were relatively long-legged, light-bodied, built for speed more than power. Adults became stockier, heavier. The skull grew disproportionately large. The jaws strengthened. Muscle mass increased dramatically. By full maturity, perhaps 15 to 20 years old, they were power predators. The environment supported this strategy. The Judith River Formation and Dinosaur Park Formation, where Daspletosaurus fossils are found, represent coastal plain and floodplain environments 77 to 74 million years ago. The western interior seaway was nearby. Rivers drained from western highlands toward the sea. Climate was warm and seasonal. Wet seasons brought flooding. Dry seasons concentrated animals around permanent water sources. Vegetation was diverse. Conifers, flowering plants now dominating lowland environments, ferns in understory. And herbivores, abundant, diverse. Hadrosaurs, multiple species, some exceeding 10 meters in length, traveling in herds, producing distinctive calls through elaborate cranial crests. Ceratopsians, Centrosaurus, Styracosaurus, other horned dinosaurs with elaborate frills. Herding animals, defensive when threatened, dangerous when cornered. Ankylosaurs, heavily armored, club-tailed, slow but nearly impregnable to most attacks. For Daspletosaurus, this diversity meant options. Hadrosaurs were probably preferred prey, large enough to provide substantial calories, common enough to be reliably found. But ceratopsians were taken too. The powerful jaws could deliver bites that even elaborate horns and frills couldn't fully defend against. Evidence suggests Daspletosaurus may have been capable of bone-crushing bites rivaling later species. Tooth marks on ceratopsian frills, punctures through thick bone, bite forces estimated at several tons per square inch. This allowed complete carcass utilization, access to marrow, crushing ribs to reach organs, maximizing nutritional extraction. In competitive environments, where multiple predator species might contest kills, this capability mattered. A predator that could fully consume a carcass, that could break bones other scavengers couldn't access, that could extract resources others would leave behind. That predator had an advantage. Daspletosaurus held that advantage for several million years. From 77 to approximately 74 million years ago, it was the dominant large predator in northern Laramidia. Not alone. Other tyrannosaurs coexisted in the same regions. We'll meet them shortly, but Daspletosaurus occupied a specific niche, the heavy-bodied power predator, the bone crusher, and it succeeded. Around 75 million years ago, a second species of Daspletosaurus appeared. Or perhaps it evolved from the first. Or perhaps both descended from a common ancestor slightly earlier. The fossil record doesn't have sufficient resolution to determine exact relationships. What's clear is that by 75 million years ago, a distinct Daspletosaurus species was present in Montana, similar in size to D. turosus, similar in overall morphology, but different in specific skull features. This was Daspletosaurus horneri, named in honor of Jack Horner, the paleontologist who has contributed enormously to our understanding of tyrannosaurid biology. The differences from D. turosus were subtle, slightly different proportions in the skull, different patterns of ornamentation around the eyes and on the snout, variations in tooth count and positioning. To a casual observer, they would look nearly identical. To a specialist studying skull morphology, they were distinct. What's particularly interesting about D. horneri is evidence suggesting facial sensitivity. Grooves and foramina, holes and channels in the bone, around the snout and lower jaw indicate rich innervation. Nerves and blood vessels supplying the overlying skin and scales. In modern animals, similar patterns correlate with tactile sensitivity. Crocodilians have sensitive scales around the jaw, used for detecting vibrations in water, for gentle manipulation of eggs, for social contact. Birds have sensitive areas around the beak, used for feeding, for courtship behaviors, for interacting with young. If Daspletosaurus had similar sensitivity, it suggests complex behaviors, possibly gentle manipulation of eggs or hatchlings, possibly tactile communication with mates or social partners, possibly enhanced feeding precision. We can't know specifics, but the anatomy suggests this wasn't just a killing machine. It was a complex animal, capable of nuanced behaviors, possessing sensory capabilities we're only beginning to appreciate. Both Daspletosaurus species coexisted with other tyrannosaurids in northern Laramidia, and one of these contemporaries represented a different strategy entirely. Slightly smaller than Daspletosaurus, 8 to 9 meters long, perhaps 2,500 kilograms, but built differently. The skull was narrower, less robust than Daspletosaurus. Still powerful, this was no gracile pursuit hunter like Alioramus, but optimized differently. The snout was slightly longer, the teeth more numerous, the jaw structure suggesting rapid biting rather than sustained crushing. And the body was more lightly built. Longer legs relative to Daspletosaurus, narrower torso, proportions suggesting greater agility. This was Gorgosaurus libratus. The name means fierce or terrible lizard. Gorgo from Greek, sauros meaning lizard. Dozens of specimens have been found, making it one of the best-known tyrannosaurids. Juveniles, subadults, adults of various sizes, even a few specimens preserving stomach contents or gut contents. This wealth of material provides insight unmatched for most species. What's clear, Gorgosaurus was fast for its size, not pursuit-specialized like some smaller tyrannosauroids, but faster than Daspletosaurus, more capable of sustained pursuit. The leg proportions support this. Long tibiae relative to femora, reduced body mass, less muscular bulk in the torso. This suggests different hunting strategy. Where Daspletosaurus likely relied on ambush and overwhelming power, Gorgosaurus could pursue, chase prey over moderate distances, deliver multiple slashing bites, use speed and maneuverability to overcome agility rather than power. The prey preferences may have differed too. Gorgosaurus remains are often found in association with hadrosaur bones, suggesting these duck-billed dinosaurs were primary targets. Hadrosaurs were fast, alert, traveled in herds with many eyes watching for threats. A heavy, slow predator would struggle. A faster, more agile one had better chances. Daspletosaurus may have focused more on ceratopsians, slower prey, more dangerous, requiring power to overcome defensive adaptations. Gorgosaurus targeting hadrosaurs, Daspletosaurus targeting ceratopsians. Different strategies, different prey preferences, both successful, both coexisting in the same ecosystems. Niche partitioning once again. Not through geographic separation, they overlapped extensively, but through behavioral and morphological specialization. The dinosaur park formation preserves this coexistence beautifully. Both Daspletosaurus and Gorgosaurus fossils are found, sometimes in the same stratigraphic layers, sometimes in close proximity, living alongside each other, hunting the same general areas, competing for resources, but successfully partitioning those resources enough that both persisted. By 71 million years ago, a third tyrannosaur species appeared in northern Laramidia, related to Gorgosaurus, similar in many respects, possibly a direct descendant, 9 meters long, approximately 2,000 kilograms. This was Albertosaurus sarcophagus. The name means flesh-eating lizard from Alberta, sarcophagus meaning flesh-eater. In many ways, Albertosaurus was similar to Gorgosaurus. Relatively gracile build for a large tyrannosaurid. Long legs, moderately robust skull, optimized for pursuit and agility rather than maximum power. But there were differences. The skull proportions varied slightly. The teeth were positioned differently. Details in the vertebrae and limb bones distinguished it from Gorgosaurus. And the timing. Albertosaurus appears after Gorgosaurus begins to decline in the fossil record. Possibly a replacement, one species succeeding another as environments changed or as evolutionary pressures shifted. Or possibly a descendant. Gorgosaurus evolving into Albertosaurus over millions of years. The fossil record doesn't provide definitive answers. What's certain? By 68 million years ago, Albertosaurus was the dominant mid-sized tyrannosaurid in northern regions. And Albertosaurus gave us something remarkable, evidence of social behavior. The dry island bonebed in Alberta preserves something extraordinary. 26 Albertosaurus individuals, all buried together, all died at approximately the same time. Different ages. Juveniles barely 2 meters long, subadults, young adults, mature individuals approaching full size. Finding multiple individuals of one species together isn't unusual in paleontology. Flash floods can gather animals that died separately. Droughts can concentrate animals around shrinking water sources where they die over weeks or months. But the age distribution at Dry Island suggests something different. Modern pack hunters show this pattern. Mixed ages traveling together. Juveniles learning from adults. Subadults participating in hunts. Elders providing experience. Wolves, lions, spotted hyenas, various canids and felids all show age-mixed groups cooperating in hunting. The Dry Island bonebed suggests Albertosaurus did the same. Not definitive proof. Animals can die together without having lived together, but strongly suggestive, especially combined with other evidence. Other tyrannosaurid bonebeds exist showing similar patterns. Multiple individuals, mixed ages, suggesting group behavior. Not all species. Not universal across the family. But at least some tyrannosaurids, at least some of the time, were social. What did this social behavior look like? We can speculate based on modern analogues. Cooperative hunting of large prey. Juveniles driving hadrosaur herds toward adults. Adults delivering killing strikes. Group feeding afterward. Territorial defense. Multiple individuals defending hunting grounds against other tyrannosaur groups. Extended parental care. Young remaining with parents longer than solitary species. Learning hunting techniques. Growing under protection. All of this is speculative. Behavior rarely fossilizes. But the bonebed evidence suggests tyrannosaurs were more complex socially than popular depictions show. Not lone monsters. Not solitary killers walking empty landscapes. Social animals. Potentially cooperative. Capable of nuanced interactions. This changes how we understand them. Their intelligence must have been greater than assumed. Social coordination requires cognitive capacity, recognition of individuals, memory of past interactions, communication. Their ecological impact would have been different. A pack of tyrannosaurids could take prey no individual could manage, could defend kills against competitors, could control larger territories. And their vulnerability changed too. Social species can be more resilient to environmental change. Group cooperation provides buffers against resource scarcity, but they're also more vulnerable to disease. Illness spreads through groups. Concentrated populations create opportunities for pathogens. All of this is speculation built on limited evidence. But the evidence exists. 26 skeletons in one place, and that evidence demands we reconsider assumptions. By 70 million years ago, northern Laramidia hosted the most diverse tyrannosaurid community ever known. Daspletosaurus, the heavy-bodied bone crusher. Gorgosaurus, the swift pursuit hunter. Albertosaurus, possibly social, possibly cooperative. Different sizes, different strategies, different ecological roles. All coexisting, all successful, all thriving in productive ecosystems. The western interior seaway was regressing. Sea levels were dropping. Laramidia was expanding. This created new habitats, new opportunities, space for diversification. And the tyrannosaurids exploited these opportunities fully, not through sudden innovation, not through revolutionary change, through refinement, through specialization, through millions of years of selection optimizing morphology for function. The American rise wasn't a conquest, it was an accumulation, an amplification of advantages accumulated across 80 million years. Enhanced senses from Timolangia, powerful jaws from countless generations of refinement, large body sizes proven viable by Eutyrannus and Sinotyrannus, behavioral flexibility allowing social cooperation when advantageous. All of these came together in northern Laramidia between 77 and 68 million years ago, creating what would eventually be recognized as the golden age of tyrannosaurids, not the final age. One species remained to push things even further. But this was the age of diversity, of multiple strategies succeeding simultaneously, of ecological dominance achieved through variation rather than uniformity. Daspletosaurus turosus and Horneri crushing bone and accessing resources. Others couldn't. Gorgosaurus libratus pursuing hadrosaurs across floodplains. Albertosaurus sarcophagus potentially hunting cooperatively in family groups. 4 species, 4 expressions of tyrannosaur success, all demonstrating that the family had achieved something remarkable. Not just survival, not just persistence in the margins, dominance, diversification, complete occupation of apex predator niches across an entire continent. The American rise was complete, and from it would emerge the species that defines Tyrannosaur for all time. But that species, that final titan, evolved from this foundation, from the bone-crushing Daspletosaurus, from the swift Gorgosaurus, from the possibly social Albertosaurus. The giants stood on the shoulders of giants. And in the final chapters of the Cretaceous, northern Laramidia would produce the ultimate expression of everything Tyrannosaurids had become. But that story lies ahead. Chapter 7. Peak Predators. 68 million years ago, the world was changing. Not catastrophically, not suddenly, but measurably. The western interior seaway was regressing. Sea levels were dropping globally. Land that had been submerged for millions of years was emerging. Laramidia, isolated for 30 million years, was expanding eastward. Eventually, it would reconnect with Appalachia. Eventually, North America would be whole again. But not yet. The climate remained warm. No ice anywhere. Tropical conditions extending far from the equator. But seasonal variation was increasing. Temperature gradients between poles and tropics were becoming more pronounced. Climate zones were sharpening. And ecosystems were responding. Species distributions shifting. Communities reorganizing. Evolution continuing its patient work. In northern Laramidia, Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas, a new formation was being deposited, the Hell Creek Formation. Floodplains and river valleys, meandering channels, forests along watercourses, more open areas between, subtropical to warm temperate climate, seasonal rains, periodic flooding, dry seasons concentrating animals around permanent water. The vegetation had changed from earlier formations. Flowering plants now dominated lowland environments. Conifers were increasingly confined to uplands and cooler regions. Palms grew in river valleys, ferns and shrubs in understory. This was a modern-looking landscape, more familiar than anything from earlier in the Mesozoic. And the herbivore communities reflected this modernity. Hadrosaurs, at least 3 species in Hell Creek, including Edmontosaurus, one of the largest duck-billed dinosaurs. Some individuals exceeded 12 meters in length, mass approaching 4 tons. Ceratopsians, Triceratops dominated, 8 to 9 meters long, 6 to 7 tons. Elaborate 3-horned skull with massive frill, one of the most heavily defended herbivores that ever lived. Ankylosaurs, Ankylosaurus itself, the namesake of its family, 6 to 8 meters long, completely armored, clubbed tail capable of breaking bone, smaller herbivores, various ornithopods, pachycephalosaurs with thickened skulls, Thescelosaurus and related forms. This was an ecosystem of giants, large herbivores, abundant biomass, high productivity supporting dense populations, and requiring a predator to match. The apex predator of Hell Creek was unlike anything that had come before, not in basic design. The Tyrannosaurid body plan remained: bipedal, large-skulled, powerful-jawed, tiny-armed, but in scale, in optimization, in the sheer magnitude of its adaptations. 12 to 13 meters long, some individuals possibly exceeding this. Mass estimates range from 6,000 to 9,000 kilograms depending on individual and estimation method. The largest terrestrial predator that ever lived. Not just the largest tyrannosaurid, not just the largest theropod, the largest land-dwelling carnivore in Earth's history. This was Tyrannosaurus rex. The name has become synonymous with dinosaur in popular culture. Tyrant lizard king. Named in 1905 by Henry Fairfield Osborn, based on partial remains from Montana. Since then, dozens of specimens have been discovered, some nearly complete, some fragmentary, all contributing pieces to our understanding. And what we understand is this: T-Rex was the culmination of everything that came before, not revolutionary, not introducing fundamentally new adaptations, but taking existing features, refined across 100 million years, and amplifying them. The skull was enormous, 1.5 meters long in large adults, possibly longer in the largest individuals, massively constructed, thick bone, pronounced muscle attachment sites, architecture designed to withstand and generate tremendous forces. The bite force has been estimated through multiple methods: biomechanical modeling, comparison with modern analogues, analysis of tooth marks on prey bones. Estimates converge around 12,000 to 13,000 pounds of force. Some studies suggest peaks approaching 20,000 pounds. To put this in perspective, modern lions generate perhaps 600 pounds of bite force. Great white sharks, perhaps 4,000. Large crocodilians, perhaps 3,800. T-Rex exceeded all of these by factors of 3 or more. This wasn't just for killing. Prey could be killed with far less force. A bite severing major blood vessels or crushing the windpipe doesn't require tons of pressure. The extreme bite force served a different purpose: bone crushing. Tooth marks on Triceratops frills, punctures through solid bones several centimeters thick, tooth marks on Edmontosaurus vertebrae, crushing damage to thick limb bones, coprolites, fossilized feces containing bone fragments, not just swallowed accidentally, but deliberately crushed and digested. T-Rex could consume prey more completely than any previous tyrannosaurid. Access marrow from within long bones, crush ribs to reach organs, break open skulls. This provided nutritional advantage, maximum caloric extraction from each kill. In competitive environments, or when kills were infrequent, this mattered. The teeth were the largest of any tyrannosaurid, some exceeding 30 centimeters in total length, including root. Crown heights exceeding 15 centimeters in the largest specimens, extremely thick. Cross-sections nearly circular in some teeth rather than blade-like, built to resist breakage under tremendous stress. The serrations were well developed, but not extremely fine, robust enough to remain functional when crushing bone rather than just slicing flesh. And the enamel, thick, reinforced, capable of withstanding forces that would shatter teeth in other predators. The sensory systems inherited from earlier tyrannosauroids were fully developed. Brain size relative to body mass approached the maximum for non-avian dinosaurs, not matching the encephalization of modern birds or mammals, but high for a reptile, high for a large animal of any kind. The olfactory bulbs, brain regions processing smell, were enormous, proportionally larger than in most other dinosaurs, suggesting acute sense of smell, useful for detecting carrion from kilometers away, useful for tracking wounded prey, useful for locating potential mates. Their optic lobes, processing vision, were well developed, the eye sockets positioned to allow substantial binocular overlap, enhanced depth perception, the ability to judge distance accurately. Studies suggest visual acuity exceeding modern eagles, resolution fine enough to detect movement at distances exceeding a kilometer in good conditions. The inner ear structure provided excellent balance and spatial awareness. The semicircular canals, detecting head movement, were large and well developed, allowing precise head control during attacks, important for an animal whose primary weapon was its head. T-Rex was not a simple killing machine. It was a perceptive, intelligent predator, capable of complex behaviors, processing vast amounts of sensory information, seeing, smelling, hearing, maintaining spatial awareness in 3 dimensions, all while coordinating a 6 to 9 ton body through complex terrain and attacks on dangerous prey. The prey were indeed dangerous. Triceratops was not helpless. 6 tons of bulk, 3 horns, 2 exceeding a meter in length, a massive beak capable of shearing through branches as thick as a human arm, defensive, aggressive when threatened, capable of inflicting mortal wounds. Evidence suggests T-Rex hunted Triceratops regularly. Tooth marks on Triceratops bones, healed bite wounds on Triceratops skulls, evidence of survived attacks. Triceratops remains showing signs of scavenging or predation after death. How did attacks proceed? We can speculate based on anatomy and modern analogues. Ambush from cover when possible. T-Rex wasn't built for marathon chases, but explosive acceleration over short distances, target vulnerable areas. Hindquarters, flanks, areas the horns couldn't defend. Use mass. 6 to 9 tons colliding with prey creates tremendous force. Knockdown, disruption of balance, deliver bites. Not sustained holds. The prey was too large, too powerful, but repeated crushing bites. Damage accumulation, bleeding. Wait. Follow. Track the weakening prey until it could no longer resist. Not every hunt succeeded. Adult Triceratops in good condition could defend effectively. Herds could protect vulnerable individuals. Open terrain favored the prey's awareness and mobility, but enough hunts succeeded. T-Rex persisted for 2 million years. abundant in Hell Creek deposits, clearly finding sufficient food. Edmontosaurus provided an alternative prey, faster than Triceratops, more alert, traveled in herds with many eyes watching for danger, but less well defended. No horns, no armor. Bulk and speed were the only defenses. For a predator capable of explosive bursts and possessing exceptional vision, these defenses were not always sufficient. T-Rex also scavenged. The sense of smell suggests this. The ability to detect carrion from great distances. In productive ecosystems, large animals die regularly. Disease, injury, old age, drought, accidents. A 6-ton carcass represents enormous calories, enough to sustain a predator for weeks if successfully defended against other scavengers. The debate, was T-Rex primarily a predator or primarily a scavenger, is largely resolved. Both. Like essentially all large carnivores, lions scavenge when opportunity arises. Hyenas hunt actively, despite their reputation as scavengers. Bears, wolves, crocodiles, all opportunistically exploit whatever food source is available. T-Rex was no different. Hunt when prey was vulnerable. Scavenge when carcasses were found. Use size and power to dominate food sources regardless of origin. Flexibility, adaptability, using every available strategy to acquire calories in competitive environments. Were they social? The evidence is ambiguous. Some sites preserve multiple T-Rex individuals in proximity, suggesting possible group behavior, but not as clear as the Albertosaurus bone bed. Not as definitive. The facial sensitivity suggested by D. Horneri, if T-Rex possessed similar features, might indicate social contact. Tactile communication. Gentle. Interaction despite immense size and power. Juvenile T-Rex occupied different ecological niches than adults. Young individuals, 2 to 3 meters long, were gracile, long-legged, fast. Hunting small prey adults would ignore. Subadults, 5 to 7 meters, were intermediate, still relatively light, capable of taking mid-sized prey. Adults, fully grown, were power predators exclusively. This ontogenetic niche shifting means a single T-Rex population occupied multiple ecological roles simultaneously. Juveniles as mesopredators, subadults as mid-tier predators, adults as apex specialists. This could reduce intraspecific competition. Young and old weren't competing for the same food. It might also facilitate social tolerance. Adults and young could coexist because they weren't direct competitors. But this is speculation. What's certain, T-Rex was successful, abundant, dominant for 2 million years. Growth rates were remarkable. Juveniles grew slowly at first, perhaps a few hundred kilograms per year in early years. Then, around age 10 to 14, explosive growth began. Bone histology shows annual growth rings, like tree rings, readable under microscopes. These reveal growth spurts, some individuals adding over 600 kilograms per year during peak adolescence. This is extraordinary, comparable to the fastest growing modern animals, blue whales, African elephants. Growth slowed after age 18 to 20. Sexual maturity was probably reached. Energy shifted from growth to reproduction. Maximum size was reached around age 25 to 30. Lifespan? Unknown. Perhaps 30 to 40 years based on the oldest specimens analyzed, possibly longer if conditions were favorable. T-Rex was not alone in Hell Creek. Other predators existed. Smaller theropods, dromaeosaurs, troodontids, crocodilians along watercourses, but no other large tyrannosaurs. This is different from earlier formations. The Dinosaur Park Formation had Daspletosaurus and Gorgosaurus coexisting. Hell Creek had only T-Rex as the large tyrannosaurid. Why? Possibly competitive exclusion. T-Rex was so dominant that other large tyrannosaurs couldn't coexist. Possibly ecological changes reduced available niches. Possibly the fossil record simply hasn't preserved other species that were present. What's clear? By 68 million years ago, T-Rex stood alone, the ultimate expression of tyrannosaurid evolution, the largest, the most powerful, the apex of a lineage that had persisted for 100 million years. But T-Rex's reign was not guaranteed. Even at its peak, even as the most formidable land predator Earth had produced, challenges existed. Climate was shifting. The Deccan Traps volcanism in India was beginning, massive lava flows releasing enormous volumes of greenhouse gases. Global temperatures were fluctuating. Ecosystems were stressed. Species distributions were changing. And then, 66 million years ago, the asteroid struck. The Chicxulub impact, Yucatan Peninsula, 10 to 15 kilometers in diameter, traveling at tens of kilometers per second. Impact energy equivalent to billions of nuclear weapons. Immediate devastation within thousands of kilometers. Firestorms, tsunamis, earthquakes, shockwaves, global effects within hours. Debris ejected into the atmosphere, blocking sunlight, temperatures plummeting, photosynthesis ceasing, food chains collapsing from the bottom up. T-Rex did not survive. Neither did Triceratops. Neither did Edmontosaurus. Neither did any non-avian dinosaur exceeding 25 kilograms. The age of giants ended. But for 2 million years, from 68 to 66 million years ago, T-Rex ruled, unchallenged, dominant, the peak predator of peak predators. Not through novelty, not through revolutionary innovation, through refinement, through amplification of advantages accumulated across 100 million years. Enhanced senses inherited from Timolengia, powerful jaws refined through countless generations, large size proven viable by Eutyrannus, Sinotyrannus, Tarbosaurus, bone-crushing capability perfected by Daspletosaurus, speed and agility demonstrated by Gorgosaurus and Albertosaurus. All of these came together, in one species, in one place, in the final chapters of the Mesozoic, creating something that has never been equaled. The largest terrestrial predator, the most powerful bite, the apex of apex predators. Tyrannosaurus rex. Peak predator. In an age of peak predators, the culmination of everything that came before. And then, in an instant measured in geological terms, gone. This has been the complete Tyrannosauridae family. 35 species, 100 million years, from origins to extinction. Every species reconstructed from contemporary fossil evidence. Every chapter crafted for sleep, gentle pacing, contemplative tone, scientifically accurate. If this journey through deep time brought you peace, consider exploring more. There are other families to discover, other evolutionary stories waiting to be told. The sauropods, long-necked giants that walked on every continent. The ceratopsians, horned faces that evolved from dog-sized to elephant-sized. The pterosaurs, masters of Mesozoic skies for 160 million years. Each family has a story. Each story spans millions of years. Each deserves to be told with the care and accuracy we've given the tyrannosaurids. For now, rest. The tyrannosaurs ruled their world, then vanished. Their bones remain. Their story endures. And you have witnessed it, complete from beginning to end. Sleep well.